And we're live. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm Salvador Cordova, your host this evening. I expect that Nicholas will be joining us to help me out. I've had a variety of co-hosts like Emery Moyna and Dr. Sandy Pidgeon. I've tried to be careful, especially with Emery being in graduate school, to be respectful of his time. So we were privileged to have him for a week here on the channel talking about R.H. Brady's paper, and that was during his semester break. For those of you new to our channel, this channel is organized to help serve the Christian community, to encourage them and inspire them to believe by studying evidence and reasons for the Christian faith. This is not really like some channels that explore the creation evolution controversy. This really isn't a big debate channel. It's more about education and inspiring. It's not about winning debates. It's about declaring the glory of God and comforting people and reassuring them that He is there. So that's really the focus of this channel. The proportion of content is mostly creation science, and the spectrum of topics covered is all over the map. And today I'll be exploring a lot of crazy topics that kind of just randomly popped up when I was just investigating my dad's activity in World War II. As I've said in other streams, both Mom and Dad didn't talk a lot about their days in World War II when their land was occupied and when Dad was a guerrilla fighter. But he occasionally did, as a member of Philippine associations, sometimes write little articles of his experiences. And it was only because I stumbled on something he wrote that I found out anything of detail of his time as a guerrilla fighter in the Philippines. That was a very dangerous job. If they found you, you'd be tortured and executed, not to mention there could be reprisals against your family. And so he was a very brave man. I've often said he's the bravest man I've ever known. And he accepted Christ much later in life. When he was around 60, he's saying, "Sal, a lot of my friends are gone and I want to be right with God." He said he'd been a lifelong Catholic, but he said, "What does it mean when the priest said Christ died for our sins?" And I'd been praying for my dad's salvation. And so there we were out to dinner one time when my mother was away taking care of my sister who was recovering from surgery. So Dad and I were just hanging out. And he said, "Sal, what does it mean that Christ died for our sins?" And I was like, "So you've heard these words in the masses from the priest's mouth, and no one really ever explained it to you." So I was thinking, and so I began just trying to explain the gospel as best as I could to Dad. And I had him, I think I found the sinner's prayer in one of these tracts, and I just said, "Just recite this." Maybe the theology of that's a little bit flawed because the only requirement to be a Christian is to believe. But as soon as he prayed that prayer, he said, "Sal, thank you." He told me, "Thank you. I feel closer to God. I've been meaning to do this for a long time." He said, "For the last 10 years, it's been on my heart." Now, coincidentally, it was for about 10 years exactly that I had been praying fervently for him from about 1981 to 1991. And so he accepted Christ around the time of the first Gulf War. And that's just kind of how I remember things in terms of events and time. And so I'm trusting that he's home to be with the Lord. He went home to be with the Lord, and he was joined by my mom about 6 weeks ago. I can't tell you again to all of you how much you mean to me. It's been kind of lonely in this house, and it's just me. This house used to be full of family members, and one by one they left or moved on or passed away, and now I'm the last one left. And but I felt just a peace, because during that time when the family was here, that was when I began to grow in the Lord and be acquainted with Him. Now, I don't quite know the order of how I might do this, but let me acknowledge everyone who's here. Cheryl dropped in earlier, and then Nicholas hopefully will join the panel. And of course, Raman, nice to see you. And Proslogium, and Erica, and Salvific Deputy. And my name is Mud. And let's see who else. Do I see anyone else? Gavin. Oh, wow. Kamusta. Gavin can speak Tagalog better than me. And Kamusta means how are you? Kamusta is a variant of Spanish como esta, and the Philippines was a Spanish colony. So that's why, even though I have Asian features, I have a Spanish name. So, yeah, Raman says, your family is here on the computer screen today, Sal. Thank you. Thank you so much. So let's see. Maybe I'll save some of the better stuff for the middle of the talk. Maybe I'll get out of the way some just random nonsense. So in my casino days, it's really amazing that some of the best blackjack players in the history of gambling, and it just happens to be blackjack, that just seems to be the game that has attracted Christians to the casino, because it just requires a certain mindset of being very precise and almost legalistic. You just play everything by the book. There's no improvisation on how to play blackjack. The only time you would deviate from the book is if you're trying to make yourself look stupid so that you don't get thrown out of the casino. Because if they sense that you're playing very, very precisely, and they have and in the modern day, they have computer analytics to judge your skill level. The only time you deviate from the book, playing by the book, is to look stupid. But the idea of playing by the book, that, going by the book, that's a very Christian theme, and it just carried over. So some of the most successful blackjack players and blackjack teams were Christians. And I don't know how I exactly got snagged into this, kind of dark world. I probably began when I was studying discrete math in school, and almost a lot of the math was taught by relating it to gambling games. So I got fascinated, and I got fascinated by the fact that the game could actually be beaten. You had to train for it, you had to play by the book, and you had to develop skill. It took me about a year to develop skill to be able to do what they call card counting. And so the principle of card counting is, in simplistic terms, is that when a dealer is dealing cards out of the deck, it kind of it gives you an idea what cards are remaining in the deck. So the odds actually, the observable odds change with the cards that are dealt out. So if the wrong cards are dealt out, like 4, 5, and 6, are dealt out, that means the good cards. So the bad cards are dealt out, that means the good cards, which would be the aces and tens, are left in the deck. And you just raise your bet according to estimated proportions of the amount of tens and aces in the deck. And that's basically it. Of course, it does take skill and time to develop that ability and discipline to follow through. And I really, oddly enough, I learned a lot of, I learned a couple, I wouldn't say a lot, but I learned a couple of spiritual principles in the process. So what do I have to say why did I bring that up? Well, so I said they're Christians, but then there's a large body of non-Christians that were part of the gambling world. In fact, that was the larger proportion. And so it was a chance to be in contact with people that I normally would not associate with. So even, when I was working as an engineer, I didn't get to know people. They always put on a good face. But when you're around a group of gamblers, you get to see all sorts and things about people that you weren't exposed to. And the first thing that struck me is, we communicate online, a lot of us, because we're geographically spread out. And one of the gentlemen said, "Should I take my girlfriend to the casino? Should I take my girlfriend to the casino?" And another gambler responded. He said, "Only if you're sure your wife's not going to be there." Okay, so why did I bring that up? Just somewhat random, but then not totally. Even with people who are not Christian, and even those who are may have an organized criminal element, they have a certain code by which to live by, and I'm just going to share that. They don't get it all right, but it is surprising that these criminals, that they happen to have some, they happen to have some sense of right and wrong, and that also did strike me in terms of war. There's when the Japanese were committing just all these atrocities, among their soldiers there was a code of honor and doing a sense of right and wrong. Of course, it was twisted, and that has always fascinated me. And I think, especially since I've covered and will cover people's journey from the non-Christian world to the Christian world, they've always had that sense: where did the moral compass come from? What is the cause of that moral compass? So for the non-believer, the compass is broken, but it's still a compass that they know it does something. So I'm going to read a little bit about the mafia code, and it will relate to that gambler's, one of my unsaved gamblers comment, when he's responding to the other gambler who asked, is it okay for me to bring my girlfriend? Is it a good idea? Or is there something wrong if I bring my girlfriend to the casino with me? And the other gambler responded, just as long as your wife isn't there. So I really shouldn't laugh, but I'm sorry. It's just, it really did. It did make me chuckle when I heard that, partly because there's an element of truth to their attitudes and sense of right and wrong. So let me share my screen. All right, so this was a particular crime family, and when I was going to college, a couple of girls in my InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, they told me they have some of their relatives were in the Profaci crime family. It was the Profacis. This is the Tesorieri family. And so these are the rules that got, I think, collected from various sources. Rule number 1, obedience. This is all about respect. Always do what your boss tells you. He's the boss for good reason, so do what he says. The boss is the only one who can give the order to whack someone or make someone. If you've got a beef with someone, don't go thinking that you have the right to get rid of your problem yourself. Keep your cool. Think with your head and stay smart. You take your beef to the next sit down and let the boss decide. Always do what he says and nothing more. Don't start any fights you can't win. Rule number 2, loyalty. Always remain loyal to members of the family. Your family always comes first, no exceptions. So be a team player. Don't get in the way of each other's interests. Be prepared to defend the family with your life. An attack on any member should be considered an attack on all members, to be avenged no matter what. Also remember that other families are family too. You're expected to help out any faction in need unless that faction is at war with your family, in which case they are to be treated as mortal enemies, at least until your Don says otherwise. Then you can play nice. Rule number 3. This one is simple and it ties into the first 2 rules. Basically, just be a stand-up guy. Keep your eyes and ears open and your mouth shut. When you see something that's not your business, don't see it. Keep your mouth shut. If you hear things not meant for you, don't hear them. Don't be a babbo. Mind your own business. 4, pride. If you take pride in your business and your family, the rest comes naturally. Be a man of mafia was once used to describe individuals of pride, excellence, grace, and self-confidence. Try to live up for that. Respect women and your elders. Try to have some class. Rule number 5, silence. Now this is the big one. The sacred oath of Murta. This basically means silence, but the word omerta was once used to describe manliness. So never discuss family business. Never have any dealings with authorities under any circumstances. Don't be an informer. Remember, no one likes a rat, unless it's a dead rat. You are to keep the identities and activities of the family members secret at all costs. Violation of this code is punishable by death. Nobody's going to give you a pass on this one, so don't go wagging your tongue unless you want to die. Okay, now some rules regarding sex and romance. Since we've talked about Mafia Code and rules of conduct, I'd like to move on to recreational activities, namely the rules of sex and romance. Promiscuity is regarded as a sign of manliness, right? Right, especially in the Mafia. So not only is it silently encouraged to have beautiful mistresses, but of course, mafiosi also have some major advantages over your regular Joe. First of all, lots of wise guys have a lot of money, and this does not exactly hinder them in their efforts to pick up women. They also have power, and more importantly, don't forget everyone's fascination with the so-called mystique and romance of the Mafia. This can really grease the so-called wheels of a potential mistress. Hey, that's funny. So how does a man keep his affairs, if you know what I mean, in order? In a mob marriage, the wife knows ahead of time that her husband's business can keep him out until all hours of the night, or even away from home for days at a time. On top of this, Mafia wives are trained not to ask questions. It's a sweet deal. But this sort of freedom demands that certain rules be obeyed so that no one gets, how should I put it, embarrassed. It's important not to disrespect or embarrass your wife because, as you know, family is the name of the game in the honored society. I'll repeat this. It's important not to disrespect or embarrass your wife because, as you know, family is the name of the game in the honored society. I'm going to let you in on a little arrangement that keeps everybody happy. Tradition dictates that Friday nights be reserved for wise guys to take out their girlfriends. This way they can enjoy a night in Little Italy or a stroll down Mulberry Street without the fear of running into their wives. Although violation of a Mafia wife is punishable by death, the execution of the penalty, and I do mean execution, is rarely carried out for sexual offenses. The actual purpose of these rules of sexual conduct is to reduce the incidence of matters of honor that could inhibit the orderly activities of your crime family. Now, Saturday night is a little different. On Saturdays, wise guys make up for their Friday night escapades by giving their wives a night on the town. This happy arrangement reduces the chance of a mobster running into any Mafia wives while out with his girlfriend. News like that has a nasty way of getting back to a guy's spouse, if you know what I mean. Mobsters are expected to pamper their wives and take them away for trips, cruises, and that sort of thing. However, it is not unheard of for the boys to stash their old ladies in deck A and their mistresses a deck below. The custom is affectionately known as bringing both sets. I mean, I'll just stop there. Let's see if I'm just looking. Let's see. I'm just going to look at the comments. I don't know that I had any particular point. I just, I guess the human psychology is very fascinating to me. And it's interesting. People like individuals like C.S. Lewis, wherever he turned, he said there are always things pointing to the Lord. And I've heard testimonies of criminals who became Christians, and even in that dark world, there was always something that said, there's a better way, and you're not always totally in darkness. Sometimes something will present itself and let you know. And so one of the famous mafiosos in the present day who became a Christian after he was sent to jail was Michael Francisi. Sometimes he's appeared on Fox News, and that's a compelling testimony. It was his wife, a mafia wife, that became a Christian first, and then after he got arrested and thrown in jail for his mafia activities, which didn't involve violence directly. It was more of a tax evasion scam that made a lot of money for the mafia. It was able to sell gasoline at discount prices because they avoided a lot of taxes, and the feds got on him for that, of all things. So he became a Christian. So Nicholas, welcome, and thank you for joining us. If you have something that the Lord has placed on your heart, because obviously I didn't have anything that was that is earth-shattering except to read something about the mafia and talk about my casino days.
Yeah, shalom, Sal. Thanks for inviting me. Well, one thing I'm thinking about with this is the influence of culture, including very directly our own family. And in Revelation, it says that the mouth of the second beast will be given power over all tongues and nations and kindreds. And so, like, for instance, what's in the news a lot is, all the stuff about BLM or that sort of social justice. But my point here is that the influence of what individuals think is so important. And when people decide, like, hip hop, crime culture is cool. Like, before I was a believer, over a domestic incident, I spent 45 days in jail. And I met people who were victims of that mindset. Whether it's hip hop or, well, what's interesting is whether people liked hip hop or not, the entire culture is mixed together. So it's sort of American crime culture, I live in a very multi-ethnic area, but there's people of all ethnicities who are victims of that criminal mindset, whether they were white or black or Asian, Hispanic, of all sorts. I mean, everybody. I shared a cell with a Middle Eastern man, and the rumor that I heard was that he'd murdered his wife, and I only spent a little bit of time with him, a few days. But
Can you, I heard a little bit of your testimony when we had that very sad day. I'll never forget it. It was in November of last year. after John Maddox's debate with Amy Newman and James W. And John Maddox's tag team partner was Smokey Saint. And we were just talking, and then right in the middle of that, Speed of Sound comes in and informs everyone that someone shot his daughter to death. And it was that same night you began giving a little bit of your testimony, and my head was just spinning from all of that. It just, nothing that anyone said after that announcement was made, it didn't register. Everything was overshadowed. So, but I do remember bits and pieces. You said you were an angry person or something, and then God transformed you. I'll let you give your testimony.
Happened. Well, one thing I want to mention while you mentioned Speed of Sound or Mike is that I came out against the movie Cuties, and I was very emotive, trying to express the real reality of how bad it is, because I know generally people will say it with words, but it doesn't really get expressed. So a lot of the atheists were giving me a hard time, and someone twisted my words into slander and stuff for weeks on end. So I had to deal with that. And that was because I confronted them about abortion. So it kind of comes with the territory. But anyway, so Mike had like an episode of his weather report where they were like making fun of me for that whole thing. But then now with his daughter, with what happened with her, he wants to advocate for that. And he told me that same night that you mentioned, he told me that he owes me an apology for something that he wanted to talk. And we never got around to talking, but I understand what it is that, like, once he really understood what it is to really desire to advocate for something, he understood what I had been doing. And but as far as my testimony, yeah, the anger is probably the a very key part of making the point. So that's a good place to start. And then when I went to jail is because over something very petty. It's so petty, it's embarrassing to say what it is. But it was also very hot. It was cooking in the kitchen, and it gets extremely hot where I live. Like during the summer, it probably averages about, well, close to 100. It'll usually get over 110 every summer at some point. So I got angry, and I picked up a coffee mug, and I thought that if I threw it at the fridge that no one would get hurt. And so I threw it at the fridge, and a piece of shrapnel hit her elbow. And later on, I told her, because we stayed together through all that, but she called the police on her way to the hospital. I was too much of a coward to even drive her. And they tried to put on stitches, but they didn't take because it was right on her elbow. So later on, after I was out, I told her that I understood that, like, she called because she was scared, and I think she didn't want me to have the wrong idea, so she confessed to me that she called because she didn't think I'd get in that much trouble, but she wanted to use it against me. And there was a lot of problems with our relationship. Just out of full disclosure, not out of justifying that dead man that I was. I have no desire to justify him, but just so people kind of understand what my story is. It was about 6 years of me being lazy and not being a man towards the relationship. And she was really temperamental and abusive. But we also, the good points of the relationship were really good in the sense that we would have broken up if there wasn't a lot of really good also, which is neither here nor there. But after about 6 years, the person I was back then, I started reciprocating abuse. And so what I went to jail for was actually an occasion where if I had thought maybe someone would get hurt, I would not have thrown the mug. I was not actually angry enough to risk hurting her. I was just stupid enough to not realize that was a risk. So that was another thing I learned, and this is just such a helpful lesson is all, that everything is a liability, whether it seems like one or not. Like if I stay home, there could be a home invasion, I could be murdered, even though it's extremely unlikely. I'm just making the point that everything's a liability. If I go out of the house, I could be hit by a car or in a car wreck if I go into a car and go somewhere. And so it's just good to know that at every moment so that, now if I was in a new situation like that, where I thought of doing something I never really thought of doing before, it's like I would have it in my mind, or I do have it in my mind now. Not that I have anger problems anymore. We'll get to that. But I do have it in my mind now that it's a liability no matter what it is. So I won't do something like that. So that's what I went to jail for. Jail went really well. So, yeah, I mean, it's not a good jail up here. So, like, it was hard and stuff in ways. And there were some scary times, but I can thrive in all those conditions. And I was really popular with everyone. I had like, they called me Jesus because I had long hair. And I would say I was a false Christian at that time, but it's like, now I don't know. It's like, maybe now I do better, but maybe I was very much like, I think it was a tax collector, right? And they were traitors to their people. And, but the tax collector beat his heart and said, just begged God for mercy, basically. And maybe I was something like that. I don't know, but I was really bad. It's not acceptable for Christians to be like I was. And yeah, but it got to the point after that. I had a lot of resentment after I came out. And then as a child, too, my temper developed because I was the youngest child. And, my siblings did a lot of dumb kid stuff that it was hard on me because I just had no power in those situations. It wasn't like extreme situations or anything, but it was just a constant thing. I was small for my age too and stuff, and very weak. So I was always, I guess you could say it's little man syndrome, but it's a little more than that in the sense that like I experienced a lot of unfairness that I didn't have any way to, get any rectification for or anything. So I think that was already like in my psychology, but I wasn't applying it because that's not what I thought was right. But then in this circumstance with this resentment and the continued abuse and stuff, I started to become, and it probably was already there. That's why I threw the cup, right? It definitely was already there. But it escalated some before the relationship ended. Not too long after that, just a couple years or a few years. So I was literally addicted to anger. It's chemicals in the body. And the chemical cycle, like if you're addicted to cigarettes, and then it's very stressful to not have a cigarette. It's like, people get that way with their sexual desire in their body too, of course. But then here I was that way with anger now. And I think she had been that way before I even met her many years before. Our whole relationship was about 8 years. Maybe closer to 9, actually. I don't know.
That's an interesting point because there are anger cultures throughout the internet. I see them especially in the anti-theists. It's a culture of anger. They like being in an angry state. That's disturbing on a variety of levels. But now that you're saying that there's almost a dependence to kind of for some people to maintain that state, I see it. I see it. The literature that circulated is very angry. In fact, I debated one of the guys. He fashions himself as the raging atheist.
Yeah, I've had a really good talk with him.
Yeah, and that's part of what I see. It's a culture of anger. People kind of fomenting it corporately, and I don't know. Sometimes it gets overboard, and it's kind of scary how bad it can get. But before we move on to the next topic, and we're going to jump around because I promised a variety show. Christ did something for you, changed your heart.
Yeah, so I'll get pretty much to there. And one key piece is that I had to go to, people would colloquially call it anger management. I would call it zero violence communication class. And this is the kind of skill that everyone should learn growing up. And I guess a lot of people do learn it by example, which is very good. But I had an example and a situation where I was allowed, to really fail at that a lot. And then it eventually got out of control when I became addicted to anger. Yeah. But so I learned the skills because I'm a very good student. So I learned all the stuff in the class, and I signed up for the one that was the best class. It's a course called Man Alive. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's based on Christianity and then secularized in order to be allowed, because the awareness of self and false self and using that awareness to be able to deny what the false self wants and do what you truly want is very much a Christian way to handle the old man and the new man. But that's the thing, is I still was the old man. So it didn't really make any difference. But I had it already, wearing a tool belt, but just not being willing to use the tools, So then I didn't really know that spiritual things were real. So I was pretty open-minded about stuff. So definitely what do they call it? Not progressive in the sense that I wanted to redefine sin or anything, but just new agey kind of stuff. I wasn't really into it, but I was researching it to give it an honest look over. And the one thing that I got to understanding was that spiritual things are real in a way that no church had ever represented to me in my experience. So that was sort of a missing piece to really putting my trust in the power, is realizing that something like that is a real sort of thing. So that, but I was talking to a friend, and I was telling her about the promises of eternal life. And I actually said, from the universe, which is not a proper way to say it, even though Jesus is the Logos, But the point is that the promises, there was nothing in the New Age where I trusted some promise of eternal life or anything, The promise of eternal life that I was talking about was the promise of Jesus. And so suddenly, as I was saying it, I knew that I didn't doubt it. And I was instantly changed, because all the fear that I could be deceiving myself, because that's also part of this I didn't talk about, was that I would follow after fascination, whether pop culture or metal music or theories about what I'd research in history or whatever. And I just became very delusional, So by this point, that relationship had ended. And since I was lazy and stuff, I just had to move back in with my parents. And it was humiliating for me. And so from there, it just broke down until my ego was like so destroyed. Because I'd had times of being maybe suicidal and stuff like that. Like if I had owned a gun at certain times, I probably wouldn't be here now.
Wow.
And so, but the thing is that it got to the point that this is before the awakening, and suddenly being transformed. So my ego had gotten so destroyed eventually after the first few years that I could no longer hope or despair. So I couldn't be suicidal, you know? And it's like I could do actions if it was sort of like, you know, just like in front of me to just do what I'm supposed to do if I didn't have to like be motivated or anything really. But it's like I couldn't really be motivated or anything. So so much of the pride of my self-identity, you know, both ways, it's the same thing, that kept me rejecting Jesus because I loved darkness instead of light because my deeds were evil. And the only way for me to come to the light is for my deeds to be corrected. When I didn't want my deeds corrected, I couldn't come to the light. But then I'm referencing John chapter 3 there. So then, so suddenly that fear that I might delude myself was really gone because I knew I could be honest with myself. And I knew it was just different than any of that. I didn't know what was going on because I didn't know what born again was. Like maybe almost 20 years earlier, I once asked my mom what born again was because the SDA church up the hill had it on their sign, something about being born again. And I thought it was a denomination. So I didn't know this. I didn't know SDA was a denomination. I didn't know what that was. So I thought they must be a born again denomination. And my mom just kind of said something about it being like, you know, like kooky Christians sort of a thing was what she expressed. And so, I didn't know anything about that. And I didn't know John chapter 3 at the time. I'm saying that now. I was describing it from my perspective now. So yeah, at the time I had no idea that born again was any kind of thing or that anyone might expect anything like this or anything. So that was another reason I knew I wasn't deluding myself. I had no concept of thinking it was possible to then step into it as a delusion or something. It just happened to me. And I didn't know what was going on. I had weird ideas for a few weeks and then things normalized. Then I got into the Bible and things have progressed rapidly since then as far as me being in agreement with the church and with Jesus. But instantly I knew that I didn't have to fear the devil anymore, his accusations to me. I didn't have to fear that I would deceive myself. But I knew I couldn't trust myself. But that's part of knowing that I won't deceive myself, is like I understand what's going on. You know, I was just suddenly in the light and suddenly from dead to alive.
Well,
and
thank
so,
you. Yeah.
But it did cure my anger just instantly. That, the peace that came, there's just no reason. There's just no reason for anger. So I might be angry for like 1 or 2 seconds, maybe like about once a year or so is about what I've experienced now.
Wow.
Or that was one of the things about the whole thing with cuties and how I came at that was I was angry for a few hours. You know, I was under control and everything, so there was nothing wrong there. But it was actually like to the point of anger, and like my thoughts wanted to go to like unforgiving thoughts, you know, that kind of thing.
It's amazing. There are various accounts of people who get saved. Sometimes they're struggling with something and it remains a lifelong struggle. And then sometimes the Lord will cure them instantly and it's just gone. The notable case was James Tour. He'd been into pornography in around his freshman year. He said after he accepted Christ, the desire just went. He said he knows a lot of men struggle through it the rest of their lives, but for him, it just was instantaneous. He knew something had clicked in his heart. And so we see that sometimes, that the Lord will just intervene and just rewire something in someone. Whereas for others, it's a lifelong, could be a lifelong struggle dealing with things. And, I don't have any insight into why one or the other, except that it's beautiful when it does happen, that God will cure someone instantly.
Well,
and there's no method. Yeah.
I have, there's things that I do struggle with, but the anger is not one of them. Oh, but the reason I mentioned the class is that's key, because I had the tools. So I had the tools in order to put my flesh under as far as earthly discipline, for the sake of the anger being able to take it out of my flesh once I was proper spiritually on the matter. And if I didn't have the tools, then it's possible for God to still cure me of it, but the way I was cured of it was not that way. It was like, so in my situation, if we hypothetically take the tools away, then my spiritual change, there would still be that danger of falling back in and stuff. And there's no saying without the skills if I ever could have handled that. But since I was given the skills, and that's a good thing about how the government handled it. So I will.
One of the few times that they actually taught someone a life skill, and very, very important. And I think that
well, if I may say, in this case, there's a lot of men who are supposed to do this, and women, and they do this. But without Jesus, for me, the earthly tools help, but Jesus is the essential thing. And same with the awakening. People have spiritual awakenings like that without trusting Jesus. But I trusted Jesus, and so wherever I went, he always shepherded me and kept me safe. And that's actually what's brought me to where I am now, Whether you have a drastic experience like that or not is really not relevant. It's trusting Jesus that's relevant. And I say that based on a lot of experience. I won't try to describe that right now, but trusting Jesus is what's relevant.
What I wanted to say is that that would be an interesting topic for another discussion. I try to, when I declare a variety show, I try to abide by it. And so I'm just going to totally shift gears, and I hope that the reader understands. And that just, it's also to break up the monotony a little bit. And then people who are watching segments, watching this in recording, they can skip over segments that bore them. So now I'm going to shift gears to something really boring. Archaeology. I remember when I was a young Christian, the book of Nehemiah struck me. And I think the reason the book of Nehemiah, Esther, and Ezra strike me is there's not a lot of miracles mentioned. It represents kind of the Christian experience in the modern day, where we appeal to the miracles that God had worked in other times, rather than the grand miracles in our life. So the people, for example, the children of Israel saw some really great miracles when they were delivered out of Egypt. But now Nehemiah is in the time when, at least reading the book, there wasn't a lot of mention of explicit, really powerful miracles, although there were prayers being answered, providential things. And some of you have heard Dr. Sandy Pigeon. He came on this channel, talked about archaeology. I specifically invited him to talk about Hezekiah and his conflict with King Sennacherib, because he was going downhill as a retired Navy SEAL, and that happens to a lot of ex-soldiers, when they're out of that phase of their life, some of them just really have a hard time making the adjustment to a new life. And he said he was in really bad shape, and his son noticed it and said, "Dad, I'm taking you to church." And that sermon was an archaeology sermon. So you just never know what it's, if you think about passages in the Bible that might bring someone to Jesus Christ, I can imagine a lot of people wouldn't be talking about the accounts of Hezekiah, but that brought him to Jesus Christ. And so Nehemiah, I don't know anyone that shared with me that he became saved because of the account of Nehemiah, but it's still God's word. And there have been some archaeological discoveries that have confirmed it. So I'm going to share that. And feel free to comment on this. And we'll cover this topic for about 10 minutes. Just letting everyone know, again, on this channel, there's going to be a spectrum of topics. We'll jump around. We try to, probably what happens in the variety show is sometimes I get ideas and I'll make an entire show on something specific, because sometimes I'll see the audience, the viewers' reaction to certain topics, and I'll say I have to focus on this a little more. It's worth an hour show. So I'm going to try to just do a 15-minute segment on Nehemiah's wall. So the first thing is, this was like, when did this happen? I would say this is in like the last 20 years, maybe even in the last 15. Oh, here it is, 2000. Okay, November 2019. It was supposed to be a simple. Okay, so this is the headline is Nehemiah's wall discovered. Archaeology proves the famous biblical account of a desperate attempt to fortify the holy city. It was supposed to be a simple salvage operation to repair a crumbling Hasmonean tower, but after Dr. Eliette Mazar and her team started excavating, they soon realized that this project would be far more. By the time they were done, they made a sensational discovery. Situated in the city of David at the upper northern end of the stepstone structure, the northern tower was a poorly constructed, fortified structure. It had the remains of mikveh, ritual purification bath, on top. The northern tower was largely unearthed in the 1920s. Until 2007, archaeologists, including Dr. Mazar, generally assumed the tower dated to the Hasmonean period, 2nd century BCE. By 2007, the northern tower was in a perilous condition, at risk of collapse. The structure had clearly been built quickly in antiquity, and its stones loosely cobbled together. Most significantly, nearly a century of nearby archaeological digs had compromised its structural integrity. Without immediate intervention, the tower would collapse. Early that year, the Israel Antiquities Authority attempted to carry out restoration work, yet the soundness of the tower continued to deteriorate. Thus, the IAA approved Dr. Mazar to lead a salvage excavation to repair the tower. The repair process was theoretically simple. Mazar and her team would dismantle the tower, carefully numbering each rock and noting its place in the wall. Then, using modern mortar, they would rebuild it. However, with an edifice this ancient, things are rarely simple. What transpired was an unexpected, intensive 6-week excavation that ended in a radical redating of the northern tower and revival of some extraordinary biblical history. So there's the northern tower, which they assumed was not Nehemiah's tower at first. The city wall and the stepstone structure, and then the southern tower, that's Nehemiah's wall. Highlighted above are portions of wall identified as belonging to Nehemiah's reconstruction efforts. The northern tower and related section of the wall have been solidly dated to 450 BCE. The southern tower and wall were not able to be dated with the same certainty, but most likely make up a continuation of the same structure that framed the eastern perimeter of the city, Nehemiah's wall. Persian fingerprints. Dr. Mazar's dismantling of the northern tower began in a straightforward manner. However, as the team got close to the bottom, it became clear that the foundation wasn't sufficiently stable to support the tower's reconstruction. After consulting with authorities and colleagues, Dr. Mazar began to excavate the strata under the tower to find a firm layer on which to rebuild. The material uncovered in the strata enabled a secure dating of the northern tower, and everyone was in for a surprise. During the excavation, it also became clear that the northern tower had been built at the same time as the straight section of wall atop the step stone structure, and that the tower and this section of wall were part of the same edifice. Among the artifacts uncovered directly beneath the northern tower was a surprising discovery: 2 buried dogs. Studying the epiphyseal closure of the bones, as well as age-related wear, scientists determined that the dogs had died of old age. Comparing the finds with other excavations across Israel, Mazar noted that dog burials of this kind are characteristic of a specific historic setting, the Persian period. The largest dog burial was found in Ashkelon. Thousands of dogs were buried here, with a peak number during the Persian period. It appears that the Persian faith held dogs to have a holy status and linked them to health and medicine. A large amount of pottery fragments were discovered under the dogs. These sherds dated unequivocally to the Persian period and supported the dating of the dogs to the late 6th and early 5th century BCE. Finally, the absence of certain material helped Dr. Mazar date the tower and associated wall. Yehud seal impressions are very common during Persian period Judah. Yehud was what Judah was called during Persian rule. During Yagal Shiloh's excavations in the city of David in the 1980s, many Yehud Bule had been found, all of which dated to the second half of the 5th century BCE or later. But here in this almost 5-foot thick Persian layer beneath the northern tower, Dr. Mazar did not find a single one. That meant this material must have been in place before the middle of the 5th century BCE. Using pottery typology and the dog burials, Dr. Mazar concluded that the northern tower and wall were constructed around 450 BCE. Biblical record. Though the discovery of the Persian wall and tower was unexpected, when considering the historical sources, it is entirely unsurprising. The Bible discusses just such a wall at length and in great detail. The biblical account of Nehemiah's wall is well known. Nehemiah was a Jew in Persian captivity. He was the cupbearer to the Persian king Artaxerxes. In 444 BCE, Nehemiah was granted permission to return to Judah and rebuild the dilapidated walls and gates of Jerusalem, which had been destroyed during the Babylonian invasions in the early 6th century. The book Nehemiah shows that Judah at the time was surrounded by enemies and under constant threat of attack. Nehemiah and his crews worked with great urgency and astonishing speed. Nehemiah 6:15 says the wall was built in just 52 days. Studying Nehemiah's account, Dr. Mazar noted that the construction of the northern tower and associated wall, which she had scientifically dated to circa 450 BCE, matched precisely with the biblical account. Not only did the dates match, so did the quality of construction. The tower and wall were not masterpieces of engineering. Their construction quality showed that they had been built hastily, just as Nehemiah had recorded. Nehemiah 3 describes the wall's construction in detail. It specifies the various lengths of walls, towers, and gates being rebuilt, along with names of the workmen. Comparing the section of wall Dr. Mazar discovered with the biblical description, one can even speculate as to the specific person who built it. Nehemiah, son of Azbuk, verse 15 through 16. This is a different Nehemiah from the book's main figure. There's another interesting tidbit regarding the wall. In Nehemiah 4:35, Tobiah the Amorite, one of Nehemiah's adversaries, mocks the builders. He tells them, even that which they build, if a fox go up, he shall break down their stone wall. In other words, even a fox could knock your wall down. Perhaps it is some poetic justice that directly underneath the excavated section of Nehemiah's wall were crushed carcasses of two very dead canines. Incidentally, the Bible records that Nehemiah had three primary enemies: Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian. Two of these figures, Sanballat and Geshem, have been identified through archaeological excavation. Tobiah has not, but archaeology has proved his name common for this period. Nicholas, do you have any impressions? Makes me want to read the book of Nehemiah again.
Yeah, me too. And that's very cool. And I have some general awareness of a lot of the archaeological stuff. I've been through it with like a once over, a good amount of it, testing different things, and including the Patterns of Evidence series. I went and saw Red Sea Miracle Part 1, and then because of the shutdowns, Part 2, I think was released straight to DVD. But what was kind of sad was that it was a one-day showing, and the theater was almost empty. So I did sit like with a couple of strangers, and we shared some fellowship and testimony in the intermission and walking out to our cars and stuff, which was cool. But we should be, people put their money into like things like Netflix, which do really perverse propaganda that I mentioned earlier. But that's just one example. They put their money into all kinds of things. But then this movie that goes through and reviews, and it's a two-part, but it reviews like disagreeing theories about what the Red Sea journey was, whether it was through a quote Reed Sea over in the Delta that was you'd still be parting and having like 8-foot high walls of water and walking miles, but it's not the Red Sea, and just all the details of that. But then also it gets into the timeline, which is what I'm getting at in this case, is that the timeline, there's contention as to whether the secular timeline, based on Egypt and the effect that has on how archaeologists date things, whether it's exactly what we'd expect from the Bible as far as the time of Joseph and Moses, that sort of thing, or whether it's a few hundred years different than what we would expect from the Bible. That's based on contention about which pharaoh is which and a couple time periods and stuff, which things relate to each other in different historical records. But yeah, so that's the one thing is I like to know the dating method, and then how that incorporates into the archaeology. But for apologetics, for how it overall incorporates together, the archaeology does fit the expected biblical timeline very well. And we keep making so many constant discoveries that, for someone to say the Bible's fiction, you have to at least be like, there is so much of it that's true, but then somehow it's fictionalized enough to become spiritually irrelevant or something like that, And I'm glad you did this, shared that story, and then just sharing stories regularly. And if more people do that, that'll be awesome, because the archaeological record is making for a very good apologetic if it's presented so that people can see the strength of the biblical perspective which is not identical to the secular perspective.
And one thing I struggled with is sometimes I'd read these passages in the Bible and I'm like, why? This is so boring. And I remember one time I was going through a bout of doubt, and I said, why are all these why did God put all these boring passages in the Bible? They just read like long lists of facts. And when I heard myself saying that these are like long lists of facts, I said, you know what? That's maybe one of the cures I needed for my faith is this historical record. When I began to look at it that way, I began to actually treasure those passages. And so in this, let me see if I could find some of these passages. And even Dr. Mazur was talking about some of the detailed construction where it was, it even specified the length of various portions of the wall and the families that built it. And so I have a different look at these passages. Let me see if I could find a passage here. And if you'd like to read it, I'll. What edition of the Bible do you read?
I read the King James, but then I have a really good habit of replacing the like old language with like normal language.
So if the viewers will indulge me, I'd like to honor God's word. If you could read Nehemiah chapter 3, and I'll adjust mine to the King James. Let me see if I could find it here. All right. And I'll put it on the screen, and then would you like to read it? You could save my voice a little bit too.
Yeah, and I can share it from my screen. I have it up now.
Okay.
And then I'll just do it without sound, just the one tab. And I like to have the text pretty big for people. Some people could be on their phone even. So
that's lovely. So let us read the word of the Lord.
Okay, I'll try not to struggle too much with the names. I'm looking straight at this one right here. But okay. Then Eliashib, the high priest, rose up with his brethren, the priests, and they built the sheep gate. They sanctified it and set up the doors of it, even unto the tower of May. They sanctified it, unto the tower of Hananiel. And next unto him built the men of Jericho. And next to them builded Zechur, the son of Imri. But the fish gate did the sons of Hassanah build, who also laid the beams thereof, and set up the doors thereof, the locks thereof, and the bars thereof. And next unto them repaired Meremoth, the son of Uriah, the son of Koz. And next unto them repaired Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, the son of Meshezabeel. And next unto them repaired Zadok, the son of Baana. And next unto them the Tekoites repaired. But their nobles put not their necks to the work of their Lord. Moreover, the old gate repaired Jehoiada, the son of Paseah, and Meshullam, the son of Besodeiah. They laid the beams thereof, and set up the doors thereof, and the locks thereof, and the bars thereof. And next unto them repaired Melatiah, the Gibeonite, and Yadon, the Meronothite, the men of Gibeon, and of Mizpah, unto the throne of the governor on this side of the river. Next unto him repaired Uzziel, the son of Hariah of the goldsmiths. Next unto him also repaired Hananiah, the son of one of the apothecaries, and they fortified Jerusalem unto the broad wall. And next unto them repaired Raphiah, the son of Hur, the ruler of the half part of Jerusalem. And next unto them repaired Yediah, the son of Heremeth, even over against his house. And next unto him repaired Hattush, the son of Hashabniah. Malchiah, the son of Harim, and Hasheb, the son of Pahath Moab, repaired the other piece, and the tower of the furnaces. And next unto him repaired Shalom, the son of Helohesh, the ruler of the half part of Jerusalem, he and his daughters. The valley gate repaired Hanan and the inhabitants of Zenoah. They built it, and set up the doors thereof, the locks thereof, and the bars thereof, and 1,000 cubits on the wall unto the dung gate. But the dung gate repaired Malchiah, the son of Rechab, the ruler of part of Beth Hakerem. He built it, and set up the doors thereof, the locks thereof, and the bars thereof. But the gates of the fountain repaired Shalun, the son of Kolhoseh, the ruler of part of Mizpah. He built it, and covered it, and set up the doors thereof, the locks thereof, and the bars thereof, and the wall of the pool of Siloah by the king's garden, and unto the stairs that go down from the city of David. After him repaired Nehemiah, the son of Azbuk, the ruler of the half part of Beth-zur, unto the place over against the tombs of David, and to the pool that was made, and unto the house of the mighty. That might be a keep or a fortification or something. After him repaired the Levites, Rehum, the son of Benai. Next unto him repaired Hashabiah, the ruler of the half part of Keilah, in his part. After him repaired their brethren, Bavai, the son of Henadad, the ruler of the half part of Keilah. And next to him repaired Ezer, the son of Yeshua, the ruler of Mizpah. Another piece over against the going up to the armory at the turning. After him, Baruch, the son of Zabai, earnestly repaired the other piece from the turning, and that is the turning of the wall, unto the door at the house of Eliashib, the high priest. After him repaired Meremoth, the son of Uriah, the son of Koz, another piece, from the door of the house of Eliashib, even to the end of the house of Eliashib. And after him repaired the priests, the men of the plain. After him repaired Benjamin and Hashab over against their house. After him repaired Azariah, the son of Messiah. I said that like Messiah, but Maaseiah, okay, the son of Ananiah, by his house. After him repaired Binui, the son of Henadad, another piece, from the house of Azariah unto the turning of the wall, even unto the corner. Palal, the son of Uzai, over against the turning of the wall, and the tower which lies out from the king's high house, that was by the court of the prison. After him, Pedaiah, the son of Parash. Moreover, the Nethinims dwelt in Ophel, unto the place over against the water gate toward the east, and the tower that lies out. After them, the Tekoites repaired another piece, over against the great tower that lies out, even unto the wall of Ophel. From above the horse gate repaired the priests, every one over against his house. After them repaired Zadok, the son of Immer, over against his house. After him repaired also Shemaiah, the son of Zechariah, the keeper of the east gate. After him repaired Hananiah, the son of Shelemiah, and Hanan, the sixth son of Zelath, another piece. After him repaired Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, over against his chamber. After him repaired Micaiah, the goldsmith's son, unto the place of the Nethinims, and of the merchants, over against the gate Mifkad, and to the going up of the corner. And between the going up of the corner unto the sheep gate repaired the goldsmiths and the merchants.
Praise God for his word.
Amen.
Amen.
So I see why you had me read that one. With all those crazy names and stuff. I'm just joking around though.
But it is compelling to hear that account. And let me see if I can get a picture. Oh, here it is. Let me show this picture.
Oh, I really like Duke Ellington's comment. He said, naming these families is similar to naming the men who died in war defending our nation. It is remembering people who forsook the easy life to go back to their home and repair the rubble. And yeah, it's also interesting that he mentioned the people whose nobles didn't bother to work, which implies that everyone else, the nobles, worked like their house worked, you know?
Yes, yes. So there's a photograph of building this wall. And as you were reading that, I was thinking, it's not naming a lot of people involved in this work, because they had time to identify specific people, and it may associate with their families, but this is a small number of people, and we know that the ones there, the population had to be small undertaking this. So it is amazing that this wall was built in 52 days. We think of one of the temples that Herod built took like 40 years, and yet this wall could be assembled so quickly. And as Dr. Mazur observed, it wasn't the best construction. I mean, this is...
Well, this may have inspired, what was the man's name? From is it 52 days that they were...
55 days of Peking?
Yeah, and then the...
Gamewell. Yes, we
Yes.
had a show on that. It just happened to be that they were defending the walls, and Francis Gamewell was a missionary. And just for those who may have missed the show, I've had my issues with missionaries and preachers, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to offend anyone, but the ones that I encountered, I just had problems with them. I just like, can you do something more practical and be like the rest of us? Because it always seemed that all they did was run their mouth, and I never saw them like suffering like ordinary people. I know that's a mean thing to say. So that account of Francis Gamewell, when he was a missionary in Chinese, and this was what they called the Boxer Rebellion in 1900, and that diplomatic compound was surrounded by swarms, tens of thousands of people, and they only had 1,000 people defending the diplomatic compound. And Francis Gamewell, though he was a missionary, the military inside the compound elected him to organize all the fortification, the construction, and so the missionaries were hard at work, and they were teaching people up, and the compound survived until it was relieved. It was 55 days.
Yeah, and I bet the story of Nehemiah definitely
Oh
was
yeah.
probably on his mind. That he's like, okay, you set people to task, you keep setting a bunch of people to task, and like, I bet that really helped him make it happen. And it is interesting because you were saying that like it's just a list of facts. And I wanted to say something at that time that'll fit well now because the Bible has so much on its shoulders. Paul wrote that it is sufficient unto every good work. And that means that, like, if you're doing science, it's the Bible that gets you sufficient to do that science, not that you can actually do it without any other resources, but as far as how you bring a goodness of truth to the table, it's the Bible. I would, and with every good work, the Bible is sufficient for us, but that means it has on its shoulders to like keep our history for us. And it has on its shoulders to make sure that like, if this is our culture, the Bible, then we can be real men when the fortification needs to be built, and all sorts of
Yes.
things. And of course, all the spiritual things that we think of first, usually as well.
Yeah, being an engineer, because I really felt like in some church cultures, you're just treated like a second-class citizen. Like if you weren't a preacher or an evangelist. And it was comforting to hear the story of Francis Gamewell, who was a professor of physics and an architect. And the Wikipedia entry even kind of echoed kind of the negative culture that I experienced. They said, well, he didn't convert many people. It's like, that's not the measure of whether you're successful. It's God who decides. And he weighs the hearts and the intentions. And that's what really counts.
Yeah, and only Jesus converts people because really we're supposed to shine as light. And yeah, it's obviously not a. They're trying to do a quantified measure and stuff, and they're trying to secularize our measure of success. But we are not of the spirit of the world. We're of the spirit of God, thanks to our Lord Jesus Christ.
Amen. And see, that's the thing that shocked me when Emery was talking about the Southern Baptist Convention. They said, yeah, they want a tally of how many baptisms. And I'm just like, that just seems so secular. As if counting the number of baptisms indicates the true health of the church leadership. Because there were some really godly men in the Old Testament. There weren't a lot of people that got converted when some of these prophets spoke. So, I think that's probably what, thank you for visiting Proslogium. And there are a lot of people here involved in construction and doing work with machining and car manufacture or plumbing. I felt that the passage in Nehemiah speaks to people like that, and also to engineers or former engineers like myself. It says God finds these activities honorable work of the Lord. Honorable work, just as it is for priests. So take care, plus prosologium. God bless you. So that was the that kind of lifted my spirits, just hearing that. Because I could, there are a lot of, if that passage sounds mundane, and by the way, prosologium, if one thing that's kind of funny is I say, the Bible can also be a really good cure for insomnia because it has passages like this. And I'm not ashamed to say that sometimes just reading it has knocked me out and I've fallen asleep. And I really did need rest, but that was a good thing that I was reading it. Maybe God is saying, you need to time out, Sal. You're working too hard, or you're trying to schedule too many things into your life, and some things need to be cut out. The most essential thing is
with my calling being, I think, just a bit different. I'm so interested in the Bible that if I can't like read it before bed, maybe the book of Numbers, some of the hardest parts of that would be the only thing that wouldn't necessarily like keep me awake. But anything else, I'm on every word. Like wanting to know it so much, because I'm pretty new to all this, and I just like I'm a sponge absorbing it. But there's so much energy with that it would keep me it would keep me awake.
And well, just a little bit, for me, is that when it put me to sleep, I would sleep so well and soundly. So sometimes I wouldn't be reading because I have a little bit of a reading disability. I like listening, like Max McLean, reading the English Standard Version, or Alexander Scorby reading the King James. And both are excellent orators. And when I fell asleep like that, I slept soundly. My health improved, actually. And I felt the Lord was saying, you need to make a little bit more. Need to make a little bit more reasonable expectations of what you're capable of doing. You need to rest. And so those passages in the Bible that did put me to sleep, it was a very good sleep. And I would wake up and I'd be thinking about the passage, even passages like this. And so let's see, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the book of First Chronicles. So I know there's some people that 1 Chronicles 27. Some people may not, they focus on certain passages that are favorite, but these, just for me, and again, because this channel is evidence and reasons for the Christian faith, not pep talks. And we need good pep talks, by the way. So not minimizing that. But this is how I encourage God's people is when they're going through doubts. Just think about what the Lord has stored up for us. That wall has been buried for 2,450 years or so, or longer. And at the time when their faith is being challenged, that's when we dig it up. And it encouraged my faith because it makes the Lord real. That's how the Lord is made real to me. Now it works different for other people, but that really just does something for me when I read it. Just to finish up a little bit on Nehemiah, there's this elephantine papyrus that was found. And they were digging all these things up in Egypt. So let me see. The elephantine papyri and ostraca consist of thousands of documents from the Egyptian border fortresses of Elephantine and Aswan, which yielded hundreds of papyri and ostraca in Hieratic and Demotic Egyptian, Aramaic, Koine, Greek, Latin, Coptic, spanning a period of 100 years. Now, how does this relate to biblical archaeology? It turns out Sanballat, who's mentioned in Nehemiah, the Elephantine papyrus mentions Sanballat. He's a real person. And that also struck me that God had these artifacts just buried out there in the middle of the Egyptian border, which is far away, but it happened to have an account of Sanballat. I mean, why would that be there in the book? That's the thing that has struck me, is that books like this in the Bible don't read like an entertaining story. It reads like historical fact. So this also would, it lends credence not just to Nehemiah, but then, okay, So Nehemiah was with the Persian king, and that means there was an exile, contrary to some scholars saying there wasn't an exile to Persia or Babylon. So this just...
I've never heard that anyone say there's not an exile.
I've heard of, some of these skeptics, well, just kind of like, what's his name, Carrier, they'll just come up with anything, and it could be on the flimsiest, and so that didn't last long, but I've heard some people, maybe in passing, if I ever encounter it, that I'm going to try to keep it as a reference just to point out what some people actually thought, because they're so determined to contest everything in the Bible, they'll even contest that.
And Carrier, he's so good with like a lot of historical data points, but then he comes up with like the most tinfoil hat way to look at the data.
Yeah. So the people studying this period are coming up with all sorts of stories. So just to show that, they really, the Bible is held to a lot higher standard because, other people, other historians like the pagan or non-Christian historians like Josephus and Herodotus, et cetera, are held in much higher esteem. But then the Bible is just like dismissed. It's like, yeah, that's myth. Because the alternative is, if it has had a tendency to make very accurate, very precise descriptions of events that can be verified archaeologically, and then also in terms of the names, places, and people, then it raises the problem, how accurate can it be when it talks about God's work, his intervention? Because that raises the stakes quite a bit, doesn't it?
And the saints are going to overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And there's just a lot of the testimony of the sacred people throughout the ages. That's what the saints means, sacred people of God's chosen, set apart people throughout the ages. A lot of that testimony is in the Bible. So if that testimony has more and more veracity, then that's that light. But that the world hates the light because their deeds are evil.
Okay, so the just tying up some loose ends. So that is Sanballat, and then now we have the wall, and it's just like, okay, how much of Nehemiah are you going to dismiss at this point as a book? Because then you have other names in the Bible that are significant that are mentioned in Nehemiah. I don't know if any prophets were mentioned, but there were some individuals that were mentioned. And if those are real, they appear in other books of the Bible. So another name that's mentioned in the book of Nehemiah is Geshem the Arabian, and is the only Arab person mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. He was an ally of Sanballat and Tobiah, an adversary to Nehemiah. In Nehemiah 6:6, he is called Gashmu, which is probably more correct, as the Arab tribe name Gushemu is known. When Nehemiah proceeded to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, the Samaritans and the Arabs made efforts to hinder him. Geshem or Gashmu, who probably was the chief of the Arabs, joined the Samaritans and accused Nehemiah of conspiracy against the Persian king. 3 sources possibly refer to Geshem, who opposed Nehemiah. A 5th century BC Aramaic inscription from Egypt refers to a certain Qanu, the son of Gashemu, the king of Kedar. Kedar was one of the main Arab groups in this period. Moreover, both a contemporary account and a king list from Dedan mention Gashmu. If Nehemiah's Geshem the Arab was indeed a Kedarite king, his influence would have stretched from northern Arabia to Judah. And what I did, I think I can't really read Hebrew, but I looked at the spelling in the part of like Nehemiah 2:19 and then Nehemiah 6:6. And in Nehemiah 6:6, I seem to recall, and if the readers and you can excuse me, it's worth verifying. I seem to recall it was spelled Gashemu in Nehemiah 6:6, which is kind of interesting that he would change the spelling. but that Gashmu spelling accords with the archaeology. So I don't know what to make of that. Now I will point out to the readers that the spelling of Mary in the New Testament is different depending on the gospel writer. In Mark, it's Miriam. Because Greek is very nicely transliterated into English as far as the names. And you could see Mary spelled differently in other gospel writers. So I'm going to leave that one.
Most of the difficulty in transliteration happens less between Hebrew and English, which that's actually changed more as English changed. Like the J's originally did sound like Y's even in English. So a lot of the incorrectness has evolved over the centuries. But I think Greek and Hebrew really struggled to transliterate together, which is like what you mentioned.
Oh, there it is. Gashmu.
Yeah, and I'll just make it even bigger a little bit here. There's one on the right, and here's where it shows how it's pronounced. So the ve is probably, that's the conjunction, where it says Hebrew conjunction. And then Yesmu is the proper name, and the S probably is a sh sound. Because people think that Saul had his name changed to Paul. That's not to be offensive, but that's a wives' tale, as they say.
Really?
Yeah, his name was Shaul. And for Greeks, it would be like asking us to roll our R's in America, to say a Mexican name. So what it is like instead of an SH sound of Shaul, it was either Saul or Paul, where we're the two different ways it's been transliterated into the New Testament. But here it shows Gasmu or Gashmu. I don't know what these lines at the top mean. I focus more on meaning than pronunciation. But yeah, there it is, like you said.
Amazing.
And then it shows at the top Geshem, but that's talking about which word it is according to the lexicon. But this is how it's actually pronounced down here.
So I don't have. It was good to revisit this. And there are some names in the, I think maybe some of them are named prophets in the book of Nehemiah. So that would then again lend credence to these books of prophecy, that they were these at least real people. So that's all I had on that. Did you have any further thoughts before we move to another segment?
Nope, you're good.
Okay, so I'm looking here. I'm trying to be faithful, to what I promised I'd try to cover. Let me see, First Chronicles. And I'm just going to point something out, because I really, it's in my nature to be skeptical. I mean, I just have a very analytic mind, and I'll pick things up. Not even, I'm not trying to be a doubting Thomas. It's just the way I'm wired. I like to examine things and ponder it and say that doesn't seem consistent, because it's being an engineer. It's your job. You have a mindset to say, okay, something's wrong. You're not even trying to. You're skeptical, first of all, of yourself and your work, because I'm so aware of how many times I mess up and I need to double check it. And it makes me kind of butt heads with certain people in my family and in my relationships with people, because I'm so precise. If they say something just a little bit off, I'll pick up, and it's like, no, that's not right. You have to get it right. It just rubs me wrong. And
I have parallels to those traits too. I'm very skeptical by nature and detail oriented as well. And I think skepticism to some extent is like, instead of trusting ourselves, we are looking to trust the truth. So then Christian skepticism, of course, looks different than secular skepticism. But yeah.
Oh, and I'll have a word about this. There is a book oh boy, this is going to tell people that I'm really ancient. We may have, I hope we'll have time to cover this some today, and if not, we'll extend it to tomorrow. This book, A Severe Mercy by Sheldon Vonnegut, it was, I pulled this off of my shelf. I haven't read the book. I haven't really read the book in almost 40 years. And it was refreshing to page through it because I wanted to share passages from it. And so when I was talking about being skeptical, I even have a highlight. You know, I used to have a colored highlighter, and you can, you could see the little highlight there.
Yeah, we see it.
Because this is conveying to me what I was, you know, relatively young Christian, and what things that people said meant a lot to me. And it says here, to believe with certainty, someone said, one has to begin by doubting. To believe with certainty, someone said, one has to begin by doubting. And that has been pretty much true for me, that the way I find something believable is to question it and to demand evidence and reasons for believing it. Now, there's some things we're not going to have anything direct for, like eternal life. That's really built on trust. So in that case, you look at the credibility of the person who's telling you that.
That's such a good way to put it. It's Jesus that makes God obvious. And when I was about 13, I prayed to God and was like, I want to believe in you, but, you know, if I need like a reason. And then I prayed to him that I can't believe in you anymore. I just honestly don't know. And I became an agnostic. But then the spiritual, as like I started to see what the world was really like, you know, after I got out of high school and faced the world some, then the spiritual difference between Jesus and the world was so stark to me that I looked to Jesus. But it took many years before, you know, the testimony that I said earlier. So a lot of that was going on at the same time in my 20s, the earlier part of the testimony.
I didn't realize it could really rub people the wrong way. You know, just like even baseball scores, like they'll say so-and-so scored this in this, you know, such and such inning. I'm like, no, that, you know, he made a base hit in this inning and that drove in the runner. I just like, get the story right, please. You know, it's just like, it just rubs me wrong because I'm a very detail oriented person. And you know, God put me here in the creation evolution debate where I have to engage the other side on details. And that's where the other side will falter. I found that if I can get enough details, I can usually break their arguments, you know, some of the big ones. And so thank you to all who saw me in my debate with James Downard. That was an example of, you know, me assaulting the other position with very, very low levels of details, minutia. But I have to confess this to my brothers and sisters. I was listening to this passage in First Chronicles, and I'm like, God, why did you state it that way? Because this sounds totally like there's no credibility. And I'll read the passage. Okay, so this was the passage when King David became, it's accounting kind of the history of David's reign over Israel. And one of the battles that he was engaged in when he was just king of Judah, there's an account of a battle where Abner and the army of Israel was fighting the army of Judah. And in that battle, Asahel was killed. And it was very hard to miss it because Asahel's brother Joab took revenge on Abner the general. After there was peace, he went and killed him as a vendetta. And you're not supposed to do that. So, once peace is declared, even though the two sides have fought, you don't take vengeance. That's part of the terms of the treaty. And that was something that was considered really bad. So it's really, it's stuck in my mind that Asahel was dead. And so I'm reading this passage here, and I'm going to read it. It's in First Chronicles. It's here it is. First Chronicles chapter 27. And this is long after that battle. Okay, so this is long after that battle where Asahel gets killed. And it says, this is the number of the people of Israel, the heads of the fathers' houses, the commanders of thousands and hundreds, and their officers who served the king in all matters concerning the divisions that came and went. Month after month throughout the year, each division numbering 24,000. Jashobim, the son of Zabdiel, was in charge of the first division in the first month. In his division were 24,000. He was the descendant of Perez and was chief of all the commanders. He served for the first month. Dodai the Ahohite was in charge of the division of the second month. In his division were 24,000. The third commander for the third month was Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, the chief priest. In his division were 24,000. This is the Benaiah who was a mighty man of the 30 and in command of the 30. Amizadab, his son, was in charge of his division. Asahel, the brother of Joab, was fourth for the fourth month. And when I heard that, I said, Lord, why did you have passages like that? Asahel's dead. It can't be any more clear that Asahel couldn't be alive at this time. And I really struck, because that's all I heard. Because I was cleaning the house and I heard that, and I didn't read the rest of the passage. And I just stopped. I said, Lord, some days you just make it so hard to believe. I said, any skeptic would be able to just tear that out and say, okay, you have an inconsistency. It's so clear because Asahel's dead. How can he be the captain, in this time of David's reign? And I looked it up. I got out my MacArthur Study Bible. There was no mention of trying to resolve this. And I Googled around. And I said, someone has dealt with this. Sure enough, there was a commentary. And I wasn't the first to have come up with that objection. And the Christian response, one of the very sharp apologists, noted, and it's actually right there, Asahel, the brother of Joab, was the fourth for the fourth month, and his son Zebediah after him. In his division were 24,000. And so the solution is, there's some things with how they do timing, but it's saying that division was founded by Asahel. It's his son that took over in his name. And I said, if the Lord did not include that little part that his son Zebediah after him, I think I'd really have issues and struggle. But, because I was hearing it and just being my detailed self, I said, that's it. That's wrong. I said, Lord, I don't know. Maybe I should close my website because this is really a stumbling block. Unless you fix it, I'm going to have a hard time getting up on the internet and saying, just be patient and the Lord will find a solution. It didn't take but a couple hours before I found a solution to this. Now, there are some problems in reading of the Bible and trying to reconcile it, with self-consistency that even remain to this day. But I found that there have been, as the archaeological record has come about and our understanding of things have come about, a lot of things have been fixed. Not the least of which is the creation evolution controversy. So I have to admit, so this passage that I had highlighted almost 40 years ago, to believe with certainty, one has to begin by doubting. And that just happens to be me. That is my road to faith. And that was just a little example. I just wanted to share that with people. I was thinking, there's some critics out there in modern day debate who really know their Bible. And it puts a lot of believers to shame. I'd expect them to pick up on stuff like that. So, Nicholas, do you have any thoughts?
No, not on that specifically. I had a thought somewhere, but then it wandered.
There is a passage in Chronicles that conflicts with Samuel, and I'll cover that. And it took an archaeological find to resolve it. Some people have said that, but who needs the book of Chronicles, because it's just repeating everything else in the Bible and getting the genealogies, and that's not exactly correct. Unfortunately, that's the Wikipedia entry. Some people have said that. I'm not accusing Wikipedia in this case. They have some problems, definitely, but they were quoting some of the opinions of some. But there's a passage in, and it may be worth an entire show, because this actually helped heal my faith. Is one of the so you have two passages of how Saul died. One passage, I think it's Samuel. And Nicholas, if you can help me this time, that would be great. That Saul was buried in the temple of Ashtoreth. And then the other passage, I believe it is in Chronicles, said he was buried in the temple of Dagon. And that was a long-standing problem, why that discrepancy was there. And let me make sure.
Okay. I put in the search Saul's two burials to see if it would help me track it down.
It's 1 Corinthians 10:10 that it's Dagon.
Or First Chronicles?
First Chronicles, I'm sorry. And then 1 Samuel 31:12, it's where it's temple of Ashtoreth, or another god. In the 1920s, they found the answer. And boy, the opposing archaeologists tried to discredit it. And thankfully, all this is of record. It's a temple complex. There are 4 temples connected together. One was the temple of Dagon, the other of Ashtoreth. So from the perspective of one writer, he could rightfully call it the temple of Dagon, and the perspective of another call it the temple of Ashtoreth. Who would have thought? And that was a famous passage in Giesler's book on apologetics. But this resolution wouldn't have been available to us unless God providentially preserved those archaeological sites over thousands of years to be revealed to us here in the last days. When it would be so easy to disbelieve God. And I could imagine that the critics were just, there've been a lot of critics that will just point to stuff like that, and the archaeological dig will solve the problem. And so again, going back to that, there it is on page 80 of A Severe Mercy, which we'll cover today. To believe with certainty, one has to begin by doubting. And one reason I'm saying that is I try to be more welcoming of people that are struggling, because the way I was treated when I was doubting, they just said, just believe and stop questioning. And they're treating me as if it's a bad thing to question and to express your reservations about something. And I don't want to treat people like that. It's like there will be things you will not be able to understand. There'll be questions that no one on the planet right now could answer, and maybe questions that no one ever will until the Lord returns. But it's not inherently wrong to want reassurance.
That the honesty of the skepticism, honesty is so key to Christianity. So then to fault someone for it. And then, I'm at the point that I'm absolutely unshakable in my trust, but Paul even writes, some are strong in trust, some are weak in trust.
Yeah. I would be in the weak side, and and so this channel is really kind of expressing how I've dealt with my weakness.
And the body needs the weaker members.
Yeah, amen. So it's like, my faith wasn't strong. And so how did I build it? Well, I started studying science. I started criticizing evolution theory, abiogenesis, looking at archaeology, and being involved in debate. And it was very healing. It was very healing. Just as an aside, people might be surprised to say that I was actually closer to my dad than my mom for most of my life. Mom and I didn't get along well. But when dad died, it was just, it was just the two of us. And we had to take care of each other. And for the 18 years that mom was a widow, that was healing for me. And me being with her and having to care for her, especially the last 7 years, almost 24/7. I needed a job where I could work from home, and God brings Dr. Sanford, and that puts me very really in the center of things of the creation evolution controversy, and my faith grew. So as God was healing my relationship with my mother, he was also healing my doubts that I've been struggling with for 40 years. So when people say that they're doubting, it commands in the book of Jude to have mercy on those. And, now looking back, I would have appreciated if people would have just simply said, Sal, you have a good question. I don't have an answer. But a lot of times they just turn it on me and say, your faith isn't strong. You got to fix that. And, there's probably some sin in your life. That's why you're doubting. And, that may have been true, but there was sin in my life or something, but not, to change the question. I would have appreciated if they just said, that's a good question. I don't have an answer. If they just been that straight with me, I probably wouldn't have had kind of some of the struggles I had. But maybe I needed to feel that pain, because I don't want to treat other Christians that way. Now, I'll be different with skeptics when I could see that they're just, they're being evasive and they're just being stupid. It's like, I'm done talking to you. You're not really a seeker. And even when I explain things, but for a believer, if I can sense he's really pursuing Christ and he's struggling, I will go up beside him. And so passages like Chronicles, and there are other passages in the Bibles that have I've really struggled with, like in in Chronicles and Samuel, and the one with, there's still some challenges with Nehemiah and Ezra, but then these archaeological discoveries are just helping restore that. And it's like, Lord, I confess that I'm weak, and people have been praying for me, and my faith has been getting repaired, maybe one brick at a time, to use the analogy of Nehemiah, one brick at a time, as I've in my journey into faith. And so I thank God for the people he brought in my life that had good faith to sustain me during the times of my doubts, until I could find things like the stuff that we were talking about today.
Well, when you say you thank God for people in your life, there's encouragement that I like to share with everybody. And I'm calling it encouragement. It's not like feel good, scratching any itching ears or anything, but it's a section of Hebrews here that I think is pretty important. Like those of us who are like actually watching all this stuff and listening, and instead of watching like pop culture TV shows, we want to be together learning about the truth, whether it's the truth of science or the truth of the Bible. And Paul is writing here. He talks about some really profound spiritual stuff about Jesus, called of God and high priest after the order of Melchizedek, of whom we have many things to say and hard to be spoken, seeing y'all are dull of hearing, because when the time y'all ought to be teachers, y'all have need that one teach you again, which be the first principles of the oracles of God, and are become such as have need of milk and not of strong meat, because every one that uses milk unskillful in the word of righteousness, because he is a babe. But strong meat belongs to them that are of full age, even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. And I'm almost done here. Therefore, leaving the principles of the teaching of Christ, let us go unto perfection. And that word's probably unto goal reached. Not laying again the foundation of repentance from dead works and of trust toward God, of the teachings of baptisms and of laying on of hands and of resurrection of the dead and of eternal judgment. And this we will do if God permit, because it is impossible for those who are once enlightened and have tasted of the heavenly gift and are made partakers of the Holy Ghost and have tasted the good word of God and the powers of the world to come, if they should fall away, to renew them again unto repentance, seeing they crucify to themselves the Son of God afresh, and put him to an open shame. Because the earth which drinks in the rain that comes often upon it, and brings forth herbs fitting for them by whom it is dressed, receives blessing from God. But that which bears thorns and briars is rejected, and is near unto cursing, whose end is to be burned. But, beloved, we are persuaded better things of you. Kind of strange wording, sorry. But, beloved, we are persuaded better things of you, and the things that accompany salvation, though we thus speak. So, and it says God's not unrighteous to forget labor of love. I'll keep going. For God is not unrighteous to forget your work and labor of love, which y'all have shown toward his name, in that y'all have ministered to the saints and do minister. And we desire that every one of you do show the same diligence to full assurance of hope unto the end, that y'all be not slothful, but followers of them who, through faith and patience, inherit the promises. And I'll stop there. So, yeah, while it speaks harshly, he does say, though he speaks that way, he is convinced of better things of the audience. But here's the thing is, what he says here, therefore, leaving the principles of the teaching of Christ, let us go unto perfection, not laying again the foundation of repentance, faith, doctrines of baptism, laying on of hands, resurrection of the dead, and eternal judgment. So, like he's saying, let's move on from this stuff into all the stuff we should know. And he's referring more specifically for the Hebrews to learn about Christ as the high priest, and that's what the book's going to go on into. But I just think for all of the good things we should be doing, we should not all remain on milk, going over and over these same doctrines again and not moving on. And we got to work as a team and build each other up. But then when we're a better team, we're better for everyone else too. We want to minister to the saints, you know? So thanks for letting me have a little time there.
Thank you for the encouragement. So off to the next segment of the variety show. And I'll just mention in passing how I got on some of the topics. You might wonder, why did I jump around? It all began when I was, as I mentioned earlier at the beginning, when I was just trying to reconstruct some things of my dad's life during the war. And it reminded me a little bit of how archaeologists are digging around if you want to confirm someone's testimony. Not that I was doubting Dad. I was more or less questioning his memory, because these are events a while back. And, you know, I'm not trying to be, you know how we can misremember things. And so there were these little facts that Mom and Dad didn't talk about their war experiences. Now, that's common, you know, it was traumatic for my mom to talk about it. Dad he was just a very quiet guy, and he had a hard time getting him to talk about anything. He'll you know, he loved doing carpentry in the house, and that's how he occupied his time from work. And sometimes he'd talk about what was going on in the office, but that, it's very simple, very, just a very simple tastes, and not very complicated as a human being, not like me. I'm a very complex person compared to Dad, but he had great qualities. He's very courageous. Oh my goodness, the bravest man I knew. But anyway, because he is part of the Philippine Association, he did write one passage. And occasionally I'd ask him, like one time I said, Dad, what kind of rifle did you shoot? He said, an Enfield rifle. It was a single shot. And that kind of stuck with me, because you see the World War II movies, the guys with machine guns, and there's Dad with a single shot rifle. So that's stuck out at me. And then in one of his diaries, it had the mention of the 11th Airborne of the United States and a gentleman named Terry Edavoso, Filipino, who commanded. And Dad said he'll never forget Terry Edavoso. And he mentioned the 11th Airborne. And I said, Dad, I hope you're, I was thinking, I hope you're not misremembering, because this sounds like a tall tale. I don't know of any accounts where there was an airborne landing in the Philippines. So I looked this up, and I said it'd be just comforting to hear. And I didn't know what I was going to find. Sure enough, I read about Terry Edavoso, so that name was confirmed, and it was in the right region of the Philippines where Dad operated. And there was an account of Terry Edavoso storming an armory and getting Enfield rifles, 130 of them. And that's amazing that a detail like that would be in Wikipedia, because that must have been a big deal. And so it struck me. I said, was one of those Enfield rifles one that Dad was using when he was fighting the Japanese? And then there was the account of the 11th Airborne. It gave the exact date and time that they had an airborne landing. And it mentioned the Filipino guerrillas that secured the landing area for the airborne troops to land.
That's amazing.
Isn't it? I'm just like, this is the process of confirming someone's testimony is true. Even if it wasn't nefarious, you wonder if they're misremembering things. Because like all of us, we can get very confused, and Dad sometimes will not remember, and Mom especially, but Dad. But those details down to the rifle he used at Terry Edavoso, and then the 11th Airborne, he named the units correctly, the 11th Airborne. And I said, yeah, he was telling me this before the Wikipedia era. And those are just not details someone would know. It's very unlikely unless he were there. And so it was just reassuring. I said, Dad did tell me the way it really was. He didn't misremember it. And it also just like, it told me my faith in what God made him a courageous man was well placed. He was a courageous man. He had all the character that I had believed in him, and that reaffirmed it, because what he did in those battles was very courageous. And I don't know that I would have had as much courage as Dad. So, but me, again, being a details person, there were some anecdotes of the 11th Airborne landing, which my dad was involved in. And they talked about this Black Widow fighter. This Black Widow night fighter had been flying over the landing area. And actually, me being very anal about this, let me make sure that I get this account right. Let me make sure I get this correct. I need to get this. I need to get this detail right. It's going to annoy me if I don't get it right. So if you'll forbear with me, and then it's a segue into how I got into the topics tonight, like literature and F. Scott Fitzgerald. So there is a connection. So there it is, the P-61 Black Widow night fighters. And so let me, this is also an illustration of how, unfortunately, with the hyperlinks, you can go down you can keep hyperlinking, and then you end up in places that are not very edifying. And that's what ended up with me. So this night fighter was involved in the action that also involved my dad on the ground. It's the Black Widow fighter. And they mention in there a certain poet. Let's see if it's there. Poet and novelist James Dickey. And of course, me being curious, I said, oh, that's really cool. Someone who's he was a radar operator, and he's a poet and novelist. I said, that's an interesting story. Well, I unfortunately found out more about him. He wrote this. I'm not trying to offend anyone's movie taste, but he wrote a novel that led to the movie. He wrote the novel Deliverance, which led to the movie Deliverance. And there's some pretty grisly scenes there that is just not appropriate for a family-friendly channel. I mean, I'm just like, why would you write fiction like this? This is just horrible. I'd like to have things that are inspiring, but that was just, I didn't read the book. Neither did I see the movie, but I read the plot on, the summary plot on Wikipedia, and there are just some grisly things there. And
I've just kind of heard vague references to it, and there's the banjo tune, and I've deliberately not looked into it because I just know that I don't want that in my mind, then I don't want to remember it later.
Right. It was grisly. I was just like, okay, it's this family-friendly channel. You know what I'm talking about. There was a certain kind of assault on a guy. All right, and I'll just leave it there. It was just horrible. And people have heard me on this channel. I've said that, our family was a victim of my aunt was murdered, and she was also assaulted. Okay, I'm not, you know what I mean. And so this hit home. It's like, what are you movie critics saying this is a good movie? There are people that are victims of these sorts of crimes. It's like, I have some problem just kind of glorifying the ugly in human nature without any sort of redeeming message. And so then I went down this path. I'm just like, Lord, I'm just like, what am I doing with my time? The curiosity got the better of me. And I said, I need to try to redeem this. So unfortunately, I just kept reading more World War II literature, and I read about Ernst King, who was the admiral, one of the fleet admirals in World War II. And I found out he was having affairs with his junior officers' wives. I'm just like, yeah, there's another hero who is just, leading a disgusting life. That was just terrible. I said, Lord, where is this leading? You just read. And then Chester Nimitz, famous World War II admiral, beloved in the country. Well, his son, I really was well-intentioned. I said, he seemed, Chester Nimitz would say things about the Lord God Almighty being on his side. And so this was well-intentioned. This was a good trying to hyperlink. I said, oh, and then one of his daughters became a Catholic nun. And I said, I'm not Catholic, but I said, maybe that's a godly influence. Well, sadly, I then read about his son, Chester Nimitz Jr. And very sad story. They did not believe in God or an afterlife. And like a lot of elderly people, they were having a lot of health problems and pain, chronic pain at the end of their life. They decided to commit suicide, and they committed suicide. Now, they did it, obviously they had caring for their children because they didn't want to be a burden on their children. They specifically decided to commit suicide on the turn of the year, like New Year's. So because of the tax implications, they wanted something to do with taxes would be favorable to their kids. So this wasn't like they were, this was something in a fit of despair. This was very premeditated, very methodical. And I was like, Lord, this is just sad. This is sad. Oh, yeah. And of course, I'm just like, Lord, what's going on here? Let me try to just read some more. And then,
well, I also think God was giving you like some awareness of how things are. Like, you like war literature, you like romantic literature, and it's like, but there's a reality to war is, and all the sin that's right there along with it. And that ends up, it comes from the minds of people, it ends up in the minds of people.
And just briefly, it says in, can you read that passage if you can, if you could look it up while I continue, in Philippians when it says what to think about, let your mind, things that are noble. Do you know the passage? It's in Philippians somewhere. If you could look that up.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. So I put in the word noble. It took me right to.
So
right, took
here,
me right
here
to
I was.
screen share it.
Yeah, I was just Googling around, and yes, I'll give you one of my top. Just hold that thought, Victory Street Ministry, and welcome, and thank you for joining our stream. And you know what? Praise God. As Nicholas and I were reading more the word, more people have joined the stream. They weren't that interested in my talk about the mafia code and about gamblers. Praise the Lord for that. So Victory Street Ministry, if you just remind me, because I'm in the middle of a thought and I'm going to forget it if I don't continue. So I was reading this, and then I, because of Ernst King and his infidelities, I don't know. I was just thinking about people like F. Scott Fitzgerald. I don't know why that came up. And then Ernest Hemingway. Now I found out something about Ernest Hemingway that's also sad. And, we shouldn't jump too quick to conclusions. His father committed suicide. He committed suicide. His two siblings committed suicide. And it turned out the father and Hemingway's father and Hemingway himself had a condition of metal accumulation. It's a certain kind of, let me look this up. Ernest. Yeah. Okay, here it is. I'm gonna show it here. Hemingway's behavior during his final years had been similar to that of his father before he killed himself. His father may have had hereditary hemochromatosis, whereby the excessive accumulation of iron in tissues culminates in mental and physical deterioration. Medical records made available in 1991 confirmed that Hemingway had been diagnosed with hemochromatosis in early 1961. His sister Ursula and his brother Leicester also killed themselves. Not that I need to belabor the issue. I want to be sensitive to the fact that not everyone's the same, and not everyone is able to deal with things like everyone else. And some people could be really dealing with some neurodegenerative issues that will just make them not act rationally. And it's very sad. And we all collectively pray, Lord, lead us not into hard testing, not into temptation. I can't imagine having to deal with anything like that. And if any of us here have to, may the Lord give us the strength to accept what we're going through. So anyway, that was like, oh Lord, that's another depressing story. And then F. Scott Fitzgerald, another depressing story. And I said, I want to be able to give my brothers and sisters encouragement. And I said, are there any good Christian writers? And I realized C.S. Lewis was a start. And then I realized Sheldon Vonnegut, and Sheldon Vonnegut's writings, and I quoted him here. We'll cover that next. And I said, Lord, thank you that you put people in an otherwise dark world, because literature and movies and stories that just write fiction for the sake of fiction.
Well, there's also a group called Canon Press, and a publishing company. The pastor, Doug Wilson, is it's somehow related with him, but they like to encourage people to do fiction, such as like what C.S. Lewis did, but to, have it be Christian.
Yes. So, Nicholas, thanks for helping me out. Here we go. You can read it.
Oh, I didn't know I was on mute.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Therefore, my brethren, dearly beloved and longed for, my joy and crown, so stand fast in the Lord, my dearly beloved. I beseech Euodius and beseech Syntyche, again, that they may be of the same mind in the Lord. And I entreat you also, true yoke fellow, help those women which labored with me in the gospel, with Clement also, and with other my fellow laborers, whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say, rejoice. Let your moderation be known unto all men. The Lord is at hand. Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving let your requests be made known unto God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things pure, whatsoever things lovely, whatsoever things of good report, if there be any virtue, and if any praise, think on these things. Those things which y'all have both learned and received and heard and seen in me, do, and the God of peace shall be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, some people professionally just have to deal. One of my favorite Christian apologists is J. Warner Wallace. He's a murder detective, police officer. He deals with a lot. And I knew someone he was also an ex-police officer, then became a head of he's the administrator of a prison. And I wish I had the time to talk to these individuals. It's like, how do you deal with all the garbage? How does it not affect you? And one of the gentlemen who was the police officer, he and his wife moved away when he got a new job. I really wanted to ask, how do how do you deal with all the kind of the ugliness, the ugly sides of humanity? But even though I didn't have a chance to ask him, we do have that passage in Philippians, what we should set our minds on. And so there's certain things I just don't, like really scary movies, I don't watch. Unfortunately, to be informed, I have to turn on the news, and that's pretty depressing because that's, and so I just, when we were talking about that novel and movie Deliverance, I'm really glad I didn't watch it. And there's just a lot of fiction that's just a waste. It's not going to bring you any closer to the Lord. And I'll point out that the reason I'm pointing all that out is if you read what happens to these authors, some of them, like the one who wrote Deliverance, it wasn't a nice ending for him, his personal life. I said, here's someone who served honorably in World War II, and then he writes poetry, and then he makes a movie like Deliverance. He ended up being his life was destroyed by alcohol.
And the writers, being a fan of that and enjoying that has an effect on the mind too, because now you have a mind that enjoys that. And if we want the mind of Christ, if Christ wouldn't enjoy it, then we should desire to agree with him and not enjoy it. But for the people who actually write it and make it, they are so deep in that way that there's a lot of harm there. And if I may say just momentarily, that was another big thing, was just a few months after I was saved, I discovered that I don't actually value any of the stuff I thought I valued, heavy metal music, pop culture, fascination, whatever it is. And horror movies, just all that stuff. And so I was suddenly like purging all of my culture.
Yeah, and I haven't totally removed it out of my life. I mean, I was a big Star Wars fan, but when Carrie Fisher died, I just like, Sal, where's your mind been? Because I'd invested so much, and I'll never forget. As an early Christian, I'd be at church meetings and I'd be thinking about Star Wars. I said, this is more meaningful than what I'm experiencing here. And now looking back, I realized, Sal, you were just, your heart was focused on something that you even knew was not real. It was just entertaining. And, in that sense, it felt real because it made me feel good. And, yeah. So anyway, even, I don't, not to mention the Star Wars, in my opinion, the latest set of movies just been terrible. I don't want to watch them. So that leads to the talk tonight about Vonnegut, and I'll close with Vonnegut. But when I was reading this book, A Severe Mercy, that was also when I was still a music student. This is before I became an engineer and into the sciences and working in the defense and aerospace industry. I wanted to be a novelist, and I wanted to be a musician. I was kind of deciding between the two, neither of which transpired. But there was that 1 year in my life when I was studying music full time, and I was reading books like this, and I was wanting to be a writer. And so I'm going to share a 1 minute, a 2 minute clip. The piano playing is a piece that I played often, and the pictures will be of Sheldon Vonnegut and his wife, Jean Davis Davy Vonnegut. So let me share, do a screen share. All right. We may have to turn off our microphone.
You're on mute, brother.
Oh, that brought a lot of memories back for me. I was practicing the piano so many hours a day. I think there were a few days during the time I was a music student, I'd practice 15 hours, and those were the happiest days of my life that I could think back. And the music was just lifting my soul. And so hearing this, that was my life. It wasn't the creation science and all the nerd stuff that you see. This represents more of me and the artistic side. And so it was refreshing to kind of see how my Christianity was also molded by these Christians who are also very much into the arts rather than the sciences, into literature and music. And before I got into creation science, this is my Christianity. And the one thing that kind of kept me in touch, and I'm going to read some from passages here, was that there was something about the human soul and its love of beauty. I could never be an outright atheist, maybe an agnostic. And I'll just read something from F. Scott Fitzgerald. And I do believe that since Sheldon Vonnegut, who wrote this, since he was an English scholar, I'm quite sure he had read this. It would be interesting to see if he read F. Scott Fitzgerald or Hemingway. And there were a lot of non-Christian writers that they were very familiar with. And one thing that F. Scott Fitzgerald said that was compelling to me was that the reason we're fascinated by literature is it expresses our inner longings, our needs, wants, fears, etc. And then when you read the literature, you start to feel not alone because you're sensing someone else thinks like you. I mean, that's really a big, broad generalization. And Fitzgerald writes, the sentimental person thinks will last. The romantic person has a desperate confidence that they won't. The sentimental person thinks things will last. The romantic person has a desperate confidence that they won't. And he's specifically talking about romantic relationships, that there's kind of a sense that you try to get as much out of it as you can because it's not going to last. And I felt that was appropriate for as I introduced this book, A Severe Mercy. And let me see if I'll read a few passages if you all will indulge me. Yeah. Davy, that's his wife, Jean Davis. That's her nickname, obviously, Davy. Davy and I called ourselves agnostics, but we were really theists. A creator seemed necessary, a creator with an immense intelligence embracing order. Apart from reason, the one quality that we attributed to this creative power was awareness of beauty. Everything in nature, in creation, was beautiful, except where marred by man, but we could not, or at least did not, similarly attribute goodness to it. For good was in man, not in wild nature, and was balanced by evil, also in man. So there was a power, a God, a beauty, with a high and inscrutable purpose, quite unknowable to man except for such inklings as might come through the contemplation of beauty. Beauty was somehow at the very center of meaning. For us, love was an aspect of beauty, though that might not be true of the power which perhaps cared nothing for man. We might acknowledge a creating power, but our religion, if it could be called that, was really an adoring of love and beauty. It was the domain of Aphrodite, and as I have said, we were really pagans. Many an ancient philosopher, and even more, many a Hellenic lyric poet would have approved, or at least sympathized with our dedication to love and beauty, our trust in reason, and our goal of the good life. I found that a very compelling passage. I said in the video description, I talk about pagan intelligent design versus Christian intelligent design. And I could, in fact, I highlighted this when I was reading it. And so it made it easy for me to, opening the book and saying, what should I read from this book? I'd highlighted it about 40 years ago, what passages I should read from the book. And these are sections that still resonate with me.
Oh wow, that kind of strikes me almost like a Goosebumps kind of way, that like you highlighted them 40 years ago for them to be ready for you now.
Yeah, and that was that theme of C.S. Lewis saying that a young man wishing to be an atheist must not read too carefully, because they're hints of God pointing all the time. So even though they declared themselves agnostics, there was something very compelling about their experience, particularly love. There was an atheist, Patrick Glynn, who, when he was acquainted with Darwinian evolution, he rejected the faith. He said that was a dark day in his life. But then when he met his future wife, Gabrielle, he found himself privately thanking God for her. And he said it's very hard to be truly in love and remain an atheist. You just feel something greater than just mindless chemicals at work. There's like a universal principle.
Well, then on more of just a surface level, like with John Maddox, some of his debates about code, it's like it would be nice if they would just admit that code is code and then discuss why they don't necessarily think it's strong evidence. But what I notice is like it's the whole not reading carefully line that struck me with that, because it's like they don't want to know what code is, so they don't learn what code is. That's they're not reading carefully, not reading closely.
And why don't I just share that quote from C.S. Lewis? And so this theme of pointers to God being everywhere, and I'm going to try to interpret it to the best of my ability. Some of C.S. Lewis is a little thick, but this was the quote. In reading Chesterton, as in reading MacDonald, I did not know what I was letting myself in for. A young man who wishes to remain a sound atheist cannot be too careful of his reading. There are traps everywhere. Bibles laid open, millions of surprises, as Herbert says, fine nets and stratagems. God is, if I may say, very scrupulous.
Or it says unscrupulous.
Unscrupulous, I'm sorry.
And yeah, that's interesting, because I understood not reading too carefully differently than how it actually is here a bit, but it still applies.
So the way that I interpret this, and this would be a question for C.S. Lewis scholars, and there's some here in the side chat, so correct me if I'm not reading this right. When it says Bibles laid open, millions of surprises, this is saying if you're reading carefully, this is almost like passages of the Bible that will just leap out at you, and you'll realize it when you read the Bible, that God is even speaking through things in literature, in nature, and when you read carefully, you start to think. So that's how I interpret it. This is that it's because of C.S. Lewis's careful reading of everything, he began to kind of connect the dots. So even as distorted as the truth was, it's finally kind of came through. And from a totally engineering side, there's ways that we'll send things over a noisy channel, but the truth, the signal that was intended, if it is constructed correctly, all the noise can be denoised out. And it's like God had spread the truth out, even in these distorted, like maybe pagan myths or literature that's just pure fiction. But then there are truths there that are gnawing at your heart. So this passage here in A Severe Mercy was an example of the two of them in their pagan days. They couldn't run away from the sense that there was something more glorious than just the mere material facts of that a scientist might observe. So that was from page, just for those that are all interested, that's from page 54 of at least my version of the book. So now there'll be passages in the book where they're describing the romance that it is almost too cheesy for me. It's almost, he's calling her dearling. I'm just like, please, that's just too sweet, sugary sweet for me. And that's someone who really is a sucker for love stories.
Did you just say dear?
He said dearling. He calls her dearling. Okay. Huh?
I said, okay. I wanted to make sure I heard you right. Yeah, dearling is a lot more saccharine than just dear.
Yeah, that's a little bit too much gush for me, and I love stuff like that, but that was just too sweet for me. Anyway, that's my only probably negative comment in the book. He called her dearling. But now he reads an account. This is Pearl Harbor in 1941. Need not say more. Early in the morning, standing on a low hill above Pearl Harbor, I watched the destruction of the Pacific Fleet by Imperial Japan. Further away, the hangars at Hickam burned. A few months earlier, my destroyer division had screened the battleship Arizona back to the west coast. On a misty early morning off Point Loma, the task force had encountered a flotilla of Japanese sampans fishing. They had scuttled out of the way as the battleships, dark and gigantic on the flat sea, had borne down upon them. This morning at Pearl Harbor, I remembered that scene off Point Loma as my glasses fixed upon Arizona, just as her magazines blew up. I momentarily and forever saw, just on the edge of that immense explosion, a sailor's body, like a little white rag doll floating, it seemed, quite gently and casually in the air. I saw 5 Jap aircraft in flames at once from the fire of the fleet. I saw my own ship streaking for the harbor channel with a duty ensign in command. I emptied a pistol at a low-flying Jap plane without, regrettably, noticeable results. A rainbow arched over the burning ships. The Pacific War had come, and the great battleships were sunk at their moorings. We expected invasion momentarily. That night, Davy and a dozen other Navy wives huddled in the one blackened-out room of the flats. But though there was no invasion, all the news in the next days and weeks was bad. The Japanese task force escaped. The captain of one of our heavy cruisers entering Pearl Harbor wept as he saw the battle fleet destroyed without a chance to fight back in the sneak attack. Guam was gone, and Wake was falling. The Royal Navy's Prince of Wales and Repulse went down fighting in Malayan waters. Unbelievably, Singapore, the Lion City, fell. Jack, our host on the last night the lights were on, went down at the controls of his bomber somewhere out towards Midway. Davy and I snatched hours together, hours under the sword. At any minute, we might be parted for years, but we were not parted. She was not evacuated with the other Navy wives, for she had got a sensitive naval job. I was at sea for brief periods in Hawaiian waters. After the Battle of Midway, which I was on the remote fringes of in graceful converted motor yacht, in a graceful converted motor yacht armed with pop guns, the war moved off to the west. We were not separated, and we knew ourselves to be incredibly fortunate. We had dreamt of sailing to Hawaii in Grey Goose, and the fortunes of war brought us here. Grey Goose is the name of the yacht that they were interested in. So this is a very interesting contrast there. On one page, they're talking about the beauty and love and all that they're seeing. It's not a page and a half later, Pearl Harbor drops upon them. And after the war, they're describing their romantic days. He said, and Grey Goose is the name of their boat. 10 days later in Miami, we were masters of a sturdy teak-built gaff-rigged sloop named Gull. Only 18 feet on the waterline, she had 2 low bunks and a tiny galley below. She was the second stage in our progress towards Grey Goose. We lived aboard and sailed the waters off the southern tip of Florida, exploring the keys and inlets, eating fish and lobsters and sand sharks we caught with a hook and line or speared. Sometimes we would spend 2 months at a stretch wandering among the islands, brown and half naked, our long hair and wild. Then we would come back to a mooring in the filthy Miami River, and I would take my typewriter out under a palm tree in the small adjacent park and knock out a story of cruising and send it off to Yachting Magazine, which would send back some money. With it, we would buy the odd fitting for the boat and tins of food and be off again. So there's a certain appeal to this, to be so carefree and to be writing stories to make a little bit of a living, and then just the two of the lovers just going off into like the Caribbean in their boat. So this is a very romantic story, and that appealed to me. And going back to that quote of F. Scott Fitzgerald, the sentimental person thinks that this will last. The sentimental person thinks things will last. The romantic person has a desperate confidence that they won't. And the way that they were living it up was like the romantic. They had talked about not wanting to die old, just like the Nimitzes. Just like the Nimitzes had committed suicide, which was actually much later. They said, they just wanted to end. They had talked about taking an airplane and then taking one final dive together so that their lives would end while it's happy. I know that's a really dark thought, but on some level, in a cursed world, it's like, yeah, you want happily ever after, but it's going to end sometime. And so that was the sense, that desperate sense that it's not going to last. And the book then goes on to how first the woman got saved. Davy, that is Jean Davis, got saved. They started reading C.S. Lewis. So this is before they met. I believe they met C.S. Lewis. They were reading books by C.S. Lewis. And let me see if I have it here. No, I don't have it. I'll save it for maybe tomorrow night. They're reading it, and it was very well written, and it was very compelling. And so I'm going to read more tonight how they got converted. But she began, she became a Christian, and I think, let me see if I have the link here. I do. I think I may have it. This is the husband's reaction to that conversion, and I shared that last night. I think it's just, I'm going to revisit it again. if you'll forbear with me, well, because the internet sometimes is slow. Oh, maybe I missed it. Oh, this is the wrong. I have to get my act together. I don't have the link to that. It was another article in the Gospel Coalition. Let me see if I can get it because it's too good to. Um, um, yes, I have it now. I have the passage now. Yeah, give me one moment. This is the May 2017, the 40th anniversary. Oh my goodness! I think I read this book then when it had just come out, because it just says this is the 40th May 19th, 2017, the 40th anniversary. So this is probably why I heard the book. It was hot off the presses and it was the talk of the town. So anyway, so she became a Christian, and it says here in this article, I'm going to post it now. Davies' faith. So let me just cover this a little bit. I'll read this again because it's a beautiful passage for me. Van and Davy believed human love was the highest glory anyone could obtain. So they set out to make theirs as intimate as possible. They would share everything, the books they read, the places they went, the opinions they held. That way, we shall create a thousand strands, great and small, that will link us together. Then we shall be so close that it would be impossible, unthinkable for either of us to suppose that we could ever recreate such closeness with anyone else. They called this their shining barrier, a shield to protect their love from all intruders. After getting married, they moved to Oxford, where they became more open to the Christianity they once presumed belonged to the simple-minded. This change came as they developed friendships with thoughtful Christian people, including C.S. Lewis. Throughout this book, Vannekin includes many letters he and Lewis exchanged. Soon it was no longer Van and Davy's friends drawing them deeper into Christianity, but Christ himself. They came to faith and soon discovered Christianity was not compatible with the exclusivity they had promised to each other as young agnostics. They would each have to have a relationship with Jesus that was their own, and this would affect every facet of their lives. As Vannekin put it, it is not possible to be incidentally a Christian. The fact of Christianity must be overwhelmingly first or nothing. Christ had breached their shining barrier. Davy's faith came easier than Van's, and he began to resent her conversion. I did not, I thought, resent her being a Christian. I resented her acting like one. I found that really funny.
Well, then the next few words really say what he means. Going to church without me.
Yeah, practically unfaithfulness. Yeah, I'll put it back on the screen. I did not, I thought, resent her being a Christian. I resented her acting like one, going to church without me, practically unfaithfulness.
And well, that might be a good segue into what I'm thinking. With earlier you read, I don't remember who the quote was from, but about fiction expressing our inner longings.
Yeah, that's F. Scott Fitzgerald. F. Scott. I paraphrased that. I need to nail down that quote. But then, go on, please, Nicholas.
Expresses our inner longing so we feel less alone. And what occurred to me right away was, like, even as a young child, how I could connect with Jesus because he was truthful and that made sense to me. And then later on, when I reconnected with Jesus and now going into the Bible, but then it fits so well with Vonnegut and Davies because they were into that with the fictional and the novels and all of that. And because I was thinking that there's a reason God does the Bible so much in stories, you know? And while you
Yes.
talked about the lists of facts earlier, there are also like so many great stories and the Gospels, especially. And
The parables, and then it's amazing. So many great real life and also fictional stories actually reflect the parables of the Bible. It's amazing.
I think I was disconnected for a second, but you were probably still there because my computer sounds like it's working too hard right now.
Oh, so I was just saying that there are many real life stories and also fictional stories that are celebrated that are parallels to the Bible. And I remember one of them, Snow White. That brought to life that elaborated a very simple passage in the Bible, 2 Corinthians 4:17. For this momentary light affliction is building for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. And I use Snow White to illustrate this. And the story Snow White actually brought that, helped bring life to that very short verse. Because in Snow White, there's a resurrection event. And I told someone, I told this woman, I said, in a Bible study, I read the whole story of Snow White. The one in Wikipedia just gives the whole plot in like 2 pages and is beautifully stated. And I said, what would happen if you didn't have the Wicked Queen? What would happen to the story? And, what if Snow White didn't face all those ordeals? She said, yeah, you'd have nothing of a story. Its beauty would be gone. And I said, isn't that really interesting that an author, to make a happy ending, you have to have the Wicked Queen? It loses all its meaning.
So then the real happy ending for us all in Christ.
Yes.
And for it to express what it expresses so that he makes God obvious and all that.
And in my debate with James Downard, I just quoted a mathematician saying God is the great. A mathematician said this, talking about quantum mechanics. He said, he's talking on the universal wave function. He said, this means that God, if you will, is the great novelist in the sky. So a mathematician, this is coming from physics quarters, God, the great novelist in the sky. And then I said, yeah, the story of Snow White. It's beautiful because of the tragedy there and the resurrection. The resurrection event in the Snow White tale made sense of the story. And I said, isn't that amazing? That parallels a biblical theme. The one thing that makes sense of all the suffering and the whole story of the Bible is the resurrection. That's just so central. And it was central to our favorite, one of our beloved fairy tale, which is probably now going to be, now on the list of politically incorrect fairy tales. But anyway, that probably makes it even better on that thought. So, it's just like what C.S. Lewis said. There are these Bibles laid open.
I wonder if that wicked witch, if rather than, depending on the analogy you draw, but not only the analogy to Satan, but the analogy to for Christ to love us, to reconcile our sin, and so that we would know what love is, for us to receive a message that can make us alive, that he had to go to the cross for all that.
I specifically, I never thought of it that way, but the way that I thought about it was actually there's been something that has been a difficulty for me for a long time was the problem in the Garden of Eden. So it's customarily accepted that the devil had fallen and his angels had fallen before the Garden of Eden existed. And I was like, well, God, you made the Garden of Eden. Why did you let the snake get in there to tempt Eve? Why did you give the other side a chance to make their sales pitch to her? And there are a number of answers. First of all, God was testing Adam and Eve. But then God was also saying, even if they mess up, I can redeem the situation. This is good. Something that turned bad, God's going to show his genius. He's going to be able to turn it around. And that's exactly what happened. The resurrection made sense of all of it. People who were dead in their sins came back to life. And again, that parallels Snow White. And so perhaps I'm belaboring the point now, but I can see now why Lewis was saying that an atheist, if he wants to remain a sound atheist, he can't read things too carefully because it'll start to point him somewhere.
Well, if I can pull what people don't like about you, Sal, with being detail-oriented, I think Lewis was actually saying they can't be too careful what they read, as in there's all those writings that are traps. Like if they're careful and make sure not to read those, there's no being too careful because there's so many traps. Just the way he was using his words was a bit different than how you took it.
Well, I took it that way, and we have some C.S. Lewis people who read, and I'm not going to insist. I got that from S.J. Tomlinson because I was sharing what I was, this idea that, and it was echoed that as you start to, I think it was also Nancy Pearcey was echoing that Lewis kept seeing the same myth come about of a God who would suffer. So this is, it'd be worth it to go back and see what that passage meant, and then also Lewis's journey, having gone from literature to becoming a Christian. Now, I have one thought. The word agape, to finish off, and then we'll close the stream. The word agape in the Bible is many Christians in our culture, and even I think Lewis wrote the book, The Four Loves. But we tend to view it in our culture that the word agape is a very special Christian love. The original usage was kind of very similar to the English, love in the highest sense. I realized that when I had a friend from Cyprus, she was Greek, and she referred to her husband as her agape, my agape, or agape mu. So when it describes the love between a man and a woman, the word is also agape. And there's also the passage in the Gospels where it says they loved the approval of men. They loved the approval of men rather than the approval of God. So when it says they loved the approval of men, the word love there has its root, has the same root word of agape. And so there is a sense in the Greek that kind of when we use the word love, even in English, it's very similar sense. So the Bible ends with Christ's marriage to his bride. And so it's a very romantic picture, actually. And so the one in the severe mercy, what the couple um, Sheldon and Gene, or Van and Davy, their nicknames, the love they were experiencing was still pointing something to something divine, and they could sense that, but it was a distorted picture. But it helped them to understand that there was something greater than just molecules and material things. There was something that transcended it all, and so the picture of love between a man and a woman is very, I believe, especially studying biology and evolutionary biology, that was the mystery. It's something that in many respects shouldn't have evolved, because men are sort of useless. There are probably other ways to exchange genetic material than making men and women. And of course, Christians will realize that this is something that God designed to glorify him, and that the relation of man and woman is a picture of God and his church. And he deliberately uses that as a metaphor. And so the romantic love, that is agape. It's the highest form in human affairs, but it points to something divine. Those are just my thoughts anyway. If you have any...
I think this is an agreement here that agape means love, and then like philia, for instance, would be more similar to fellowship, and eros would be in the direction of specifically romance and things. And I think the other one is familial, specifically, if I remember right.
Yeah, see, some people have said romantic love is eros, and that's at least in the modern Greek usage. Like I said, my friend Maria, she referred to her husband, my agape mu.
Well, that's what I mean. Is agape means love, like you said earlier, in the highest sense, or like just straight up
the purest
love.
sense. Yeah, the purest sense.
So then eros is to specify, but I think agape does say a lot more. And that's, I think, why
I'd be interested to see, it's like, as Christ loved the church, that passage, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. And then in Revelation, it's pictured as a marriage scene. And so maybe that's just, my romantic self coming out and offering that interpretation. And, maybe I might have a show tomorrow and we could talk a little bit more about this. I just kind of need to get this out of my system. Maybe we'll go back to the nerd topics eventually. Because someone here had asked, what's my best scientific argument? And it depends for what audience, and I might be getting back to that. So if you have some...
It is agape there.
It is agape. It is agape. And thank you. Thank you for looking that up. Do you have some final words before we close the stream? I really want to thank you. It's been a great variety show.
I really enjoyed it, and I was hoping more people would show up. I really enjoyed quality time, actually. And when I get one-on-one with a brother in this sort of way, like, it's so easy to just keep talking and keep talking. So it was good that we had an audience to consider. It kind of kept us under control, at least for how I would be.
Yeah. Well, a lot of my live streams are pretty, I try to stick to a script just so it doesn't get off the rails, unless it really is a very good conversation. Oh, thank you for the kind words. My name is Mud. Yeah, I do plan the shows. I spend a couple hours before the show comes on just thinking about the content, because I want it to at least resonate with some viewers. There are probably some that'll be turned off, and that's just the way it's going to be. That'll always be the case. But yeah, this has been great. We're reading the word, and the other thing is this is a big encouragement to me because I get to share things going on in my life. So, and like I said, it's a pretty empty house, but in the time that I've been fellowshipping with the gang here, yes, I'm planning on having one maybe about the same time, and we'll just pursue these same topics. Maybe try to get a little closure on that, and then transition back into nerd stuff because we're talking about art and literature and romance, and might be going back to nerd topics and um, talking about biology and organic chemistry and mathematics and physics. So, yeah, but I wanted to have a talk like this. So,
Well, I want to speak not only for myself, but also for these brothers and sisters to thank you for inviting us into your heart for the evening. And I do have my last words too, which is just trust Messiah.
amen. So I'm going to close with the video that I shared earlier. And I know some people are like, well, what's that about, Sal? It's like, well, that is really a big part of my life. The music you hear, just imagine the younger Salvador spending hours and days studying music. That was my whole life. And when I think about that, that's what connected me with God when I didn't have the creation science, and when I had all these people that are giving me a hard time in church. It was the music that kept pointing me upward, that this is coming from a higher power. Our ability to hear and to appreciate what has been made, and to enjoy the beauty in the world. So I will close with that, and thank you to all the viewers, and enjoy the music. Take care, and God bless you. Lord willing, I may see some of you tomorrow night.